Chapter 939. After about 5 or 6 hours, Ouyang Shuxing returned to the tea-house with weak footsteps and somewhat weak nerve. Most of the spectators who had been listening to Ouyang Shuxing had left, but there were still 3 or 4 spectators in the tea-house. They were obviously waiting for Ouyang Shuxing here. As soon as they saw Ouyang Shuxing, they immediately stopped him and asked him about the situation of the battle. "Oh my God! This time, I fought for 4.5 hours, I almost died of exhaustion," Ouyang Shuxing said very tiredly, and then once again gathered all his strength and shouted loudly in the tea-house, "But Grandpa, I defeated the military governor for the second time. Even if I die of exhaustion, I'm willing." Just like before, this time, Ouyang Shuxing's words once again attracted the attention of a large number of players, and they once again surrounded Ouyang Shuxing. After Ouyang Shuxing showed off for a while, he very simply played the video of the second battle. This time, the length of the video was 4.5 hours, and the process of the battle was almost exactly the same as the previous one. Without using the sword element, the military governor relied on his exquisite swordsmanship to launch a fierce battle with the spirit sword level Lady Phaseless Sacred Sword. In the end, the Lady Phaseless Sacred Sword still broke the military governor's personal shield and won the battle. But this time, there were a few very key points that were different from the last time. The first and most important point was that the time was different. Previously, the military governor failed in 3 hours, but this time, the military governor delayed the time to 4.5 hours. The second was the personal shield of the Lady Phaseless Sacred Sword. Although the personal shield of the Lady Phaseless Sacred Sword also lost a certain amount of energy last time, the energy was not much, only about 20% of the total. But this time, the Lady Phaseless Sacred Sword lost more than 30% of the personal shield energy. From these 2 points, it could be seen that the military governor in the second battle had improved a lot compared to the military governor in the first battle. The news of the military governor's reappearance and the strange battle with the spirit sword level players instantly spread throughout the game. After a month, posts related to the military governor flooded the forums once again. Ouyang Shichi was also very business-minded and uploaded his video to the forum. However, because the other party involved in the video, the military governor, did not authorize Ouyang Shichi, so Ouyang Shichi could not set a fee for the video. He could only provide it as a free video for everyone. The post spread like wildfire in the forum. Many players rushed to the forum to click on the news about the military governor when they learned that the military governor had reappeared. Then, they saw the video that stunned them. In the next few days, Ouyang Geometry no longer appeared in the tea-house. Instead, he constantly posted new battle videos on the forum. They were all battle videos of the military governor challenging him. The 3rd time, the 4th time, the 5th time, the 6th time, the military governor challenged Ouyang Geometry's Lady Phaseless Sacred Sword again and again. Although the Lady Phaseless Sacred Sword won in the end, the duration of each battle was longer than the previous one. The Lady Phaseless Sacred Sword also lost more personal shield energy than the previous one. In the end, on the 7th attempt, after a full 8 hours of arduous battle, the commander finally broke through the Lady Phaseless Divine Sword's personal protective shield. He still had about 10% of his personal protective shield left, so he could be considered to have achieved a legitimate victory. Although this was the result that all the players had already guessed, when they really saw that a sword wielder was actually able to defeat a spirit sword level swordmistress without using sword essence, this kind of violent shock swept through the hearts of every player like a storm. Only then did they realize that simple sword techniques could also be terrifying to such an extent, to actually be able to directly defeat a powerful spirit sword level swordmistress who went all out. However, Ouyang Chigua's defeat did not signify the end of the admiral's journey. In just a short span of 2 days, another player named Yimogu Cheng copied Ouyang Chigua's actions and uploaded his own battle video onto the forum. Yimogu Cheng's opponent was none other than the admiral. Yimogu City's spirit sword level swordmistress was the famous blood transformation sword. It was said that it was a sword modified from the blood transformation sword. It was a powerful demonic sword. The phaseless sacred sword was ranked 39th in the spirit sword record, while the blood transformation sword was ranked 27th in the famous sword's record, which was 12 places ahead of the phaseless sacred sword. The spirit sword record was not like the treasure sword record or the famous sword's record. Because there were a lot of sword mistresses in the treasure sword record and the famous sword's record, the gap between each rank was not big. Moreover, it did not mean that the one with a higher rank would definitely win. Many times there was the possibility of a counterattack. However, in the spirit sword record, unless the sword wielder of both sides had a difference of more than tens of thousands of sword essence, it was difficult for the spirit swords to counterattack. This was because the difference between each name in the spirit sword record was quite huge. Therefore, when the military governor and the blood transformation sword lady fought in the first battle, the military governor, who had defeated the phaseless sacred sword lady before, suffered a crushing defeat this time. In less than 2 hours, the admiral had been defeated by Lady Swords of the bloodline Extinction Goddess. However, the plot after that was the same as what Ouyang Qiushi had experienced. The military governor continuously issued challenges to the blood transformation sword lady. In 5 days, he issued a total of 8 challenge invitations. Each challenge took more time and consumed more energy than the previous one. The military governor was progressing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Therefore, Yimogu Cheng also ushered in the same ending as Ouyang Qiushi. In the end, he was defeated by the military governor. It was just that Yimogu Cheng was a little luckier than Ouyang Qiushi. Because Ouyang Qiushi was defeated on the 7th time, but Yimogu Cheng persisted until the 9th time. There was nothing much to say about the following plot. It was nothing more than a reincarnation of the previous plot. The inspector continued to challenge the spirit sword rank sword maidens who were ranked higher than him, and he continued to grow in defeat after defeat, and finally defeated his opponent. This kind of challenge lasted for a whole month, and the entire forum also discussed for a whole month. This discussion even gradually spread to the world outside the game. Many sword-bearers who never played games in real life also discovered that such a madman had appeared in the game. He was actually able to defeat so many sword ladies of the spirit sword realm without using sword element. Although these sword ladies were sword ladies in the game, in theory, their strength was slightly weaker than the real sword ladies. However, these sword ladies were actually the consciousness fragments of natural sword ladies. Their own swordsmanship was almost at the same level as the real sword ladies. If the sword ladies in the game were defeated, the real sword ladies might not be much stronger. Gradually, these few questions formed in the hearts of the people in the military governor's challenge. First, was the sword essence really as important as people thought? Would humans be able to kill the powerful Yuanko even without the sword element? Second, what was the limit of the military governor without using the sword essence? Then, without using the sword essence, could he defeat an immortal sword wielder or even an emperor sword wielder? Third, could ordinary humans achieve the same swordsmanship as the military governor? If they could, didn't this mean that even if ordinary humans could not synchronize with the sword ladies, as long as they had a weapon that could hurt Yuan Ko, could they also become an existence equivalent to a spirit sword wielder? This kind of question constantly lingered in the minds of humans, and it even gradually formed a logic called useless sword essence theory. Many humans who aspired to become sword wielders but were forever blocked at the door because they could not synchronize with the sword ladies seemed to have seen the dawn of their lives. They learned from this military governor and practiced a good swordsmanship. They could also fight for humanity. Probably aware of the impact of this trend, on the 25th day of the military governor's challenge, the official media of the 8 major base cities published such an editorial almost at the same time. First of all, the author of this editorial was very shocking. This was because the author was none other than the Emperor of Sword Wielders, the great Hao Tianjiandi. In this editorial, Hao Tianjiandi first explained why the military governor wanted to challenge like this. Hao Tianjiandi said that this was because the military governor was training his swordsmanship. He wanted to reach a higher level of swordsmanship. That was all. There was no other purpose. Following that, the Clear Sky Sword Emperor very clearly answered a few questions from above. First, the sword essence was indeed very important. The sword essence was the foundation of every sword wielder. A sword wielder could not go astray on this path. Working hard to improve one's sword essence was the best way to become stronger. However, Hao Tianjiandi also admitted that humans could indeed kill the powerful Yuan Ko without the sword essence. Secondly, without using sword essence, the limit of a human being's ability to defeat a universe-grade Yuan Ko, which was the human's immortal-grade sword wielder. Hao Tianjiandi could make such a judgment because Hao Tianjiandi had discovered this after looking up the information of the Liunian family. After Kanzu became an emperor sword wielder, he had given up on using the sword essence for a period of time. Instead, he had relied on his swordsmanship like the military governor. His Majesty Kanzu's strongest achievement was using swordsmanship to defeat universe-level Yuan Ko. As for flood-level and desolation-level Yuan Ko, Kanzu had used the sword essence every time he encountered them. He had never thought of using swordsmanship to defeat his opponent. His Majesty Kanzu was unparalleled. The limit that he could reach was naturally the limit that other sword wielders could reach. Therefore, universe-level Yuan Ko was the limit that could be reached. This player, called the military governor, could only reach this limit in his lifetime. Third, Hao Tianjiandi also told everyone clearly that normal people could not reach the same level of swordsmanship as the military governor. Hao Tianjiandi even revealed that he had met the military governor in real life. The military governor was also a very powerful sword wielder in real life. More importantly, the military governor was extremely talented. He was not inferior to Zhe Tianjiandi back then. That was why he had achieved so much and trained himself by fighting with the Sword Lady. More importantly, although the military governor did not use the sword essence, he was a true famed sword wielder. The Sword Lady in his hand was a real famed Sword Lady. When he was one with his mind, he could unleash the Sword Lady's true power. This power was something that normal people could not unleash even if they held a famed Sword Lady. At the same time, the military governor's physique was dozens of times better than normal people. For example, the footwork that the military governor used in the recording was so fast that it was impossible for a normal person to reach such a high speed. Therefore, if a normal person wanted to imitate the military governor, it would undoubtedly be like a child learning to walk. It would only be a joke. However, it was not impossible to imitate the military governor's path. Most people only needed to practice hard and reach a certain level of swordsmanship. In that case, as long as one had an artificial sword maiden that could not be synchronized, they would be able to fight against Mouse and Tiger Yuenko. In other words, they would be equivalent to an ancient sword-tier swordsman. Some sword-bearers with outstanding swordsmanship could fight ghost-level and soul-level Yuan Ko. They were equivalent to treasured sword-bearers. However, this was the limit of a normal person. In the end, Hao Tianjiandi made a concluding statement. Sword-bearers were not allowed to learn the military governor's fighting style. They were also not allowed to practice their own swordsmanship. This was because before they could master their swordsmanship, they would die under Yuan Ko's attacks because they did not have the protection of the Sword Lady. As for normal people, they could try to practice swordsmanship. If they found that they had good swordsmanship talent, they could try to practice swordsmanship. At the same time, the Sword Committee also wanted to set up experimental classes for sword masters in the 8 Bay Cities academies. Ordinary people with decent talent in swordsmanship could sign up for these experimental classes. The Sword Committee would conduct a comprehensive study on the possibility of letting ordinary sword masters join the battle. After Hao Tianjiandi's editorial was published, the entire human society was instantly in an uproar. A large number of media outlets analyzed Hao Tianjiandi's speech and found that if the sword master teaching classes were successful, normal people would also have the strength to fight Yuan Ko. Then, the power of human beings would undoubtedly enter a new era. One could imagine the scene of an army made up of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of normal people fighting against Yuan Ko. All in all, the whole world became different after Gohan's challenge. As the core person who caused all this, Gohan knew nothing about the outside world. He was completely immersed in improving his swordsmanship. Chapter 940. In reality, all ordinary people felt their blood boiling because of Hao Tianjiandi's editorial and felt that a new era of mankind was coming. On the other hand, the players' expectations for the military governor had also risen to the peak, because the military governor had previously defeated the 8th-ranked spiritual sword-level swordmistress. According to the order, the military governor should challenge the 7th-ranked spiritual sword-level swordmistress. However, not all spiritual sword-level swordmistresses in the game had their own sword-bearers. In fact, in the entire game, there were only 2 sword-bearers who had spiritual sword-level swordmistresses ranked in the top 7. One of the spiritual sword-level swordmistresses was an old acquaintance of Gohan. It was Liquorguard, the spiritual sword-level swordmistress who had fought against Gohan in the 8th-city tournament. Her spiritual sword-level swordmistress was the 5th-ranked spiritual sword-level swordmistress, Jean. In a room full of medieval style, Liquorguard sat silently on her bed, looking at her personal terminal from time to time as if waiting for some important communication. Behind Liquorguard, a girl in silver-white steel armor and her sword mistress maintained the same posture, sitting upright on the bed. The two of them were like 2 statues. "It's here." Liquorguard felt her personal terminal vibrate, and then a message was directly sent to her mind. After reading the message, Liquorguard immediately stood up from the bed like a spring, clenched her hands tightly into fists, and turned to look at sword mistress Jean behind her. "Jean, our chance to avenge our humiliation has finally come." When Liquorguard said this, her mood became obviously agitated. The pair of huge breasts on her chest wantonly swayed, rolled, and pushed each other. Since being defeated by the military governor in the 8th-city tournament in a humiliating way, Liquorguard had been thinking about how to take revenge all the time. At the same time, she trained herself in a way that could be called abusive. In terms of self-esteem, Liquorguard felt that her body had more than doubled. Now it was finally time for her revenge. All the players in the game were looking forward to the battle between Jean d'Arc and the military governor, but unlike before, there was no news about this battle released in the forum. It was as if the military governor had stopped his challenge. For 5 consecutive days, the entire forum was quiet. Just when everyone thought that the military governor had given up, a new message exploded on the forum. A player with the verified game ID, Liquorguard, suddenly posted on the forum. "From today onwards, my game ID Liquorguard. My real name is Liquorguard Dracula. I voluntarily recognize the military governor as my godfather, and I voluntarily become the goddaughter of the military governor. Be it my loyal followers and subordinates in the game or in reality, all my honor, wealth, and everything belong to military governor Daddy." Such a simple post instantly blew up the entire forum like an atomic bomb. No one understood what was going on. Why did Liquorguard post such a seemingly inexplicable post? Why did she suddenly recognize the military governor as her father? Just when everyone was discussing this matter, a player with the ID Leslie on the forum gave all the curious players an explanation. She even posted the long-awaited battle video of Jean d'Arc and the military governor on the forum. After watching the battle video, the players finally realized what had happened. The video started in a ring. On both sides of the ring were Liquorguard and the military governor. First, the military governor thanked Liquorguard in a very tired voice for accepting his challenge. Then, he explained that he would only fight against Jean d'Arc and that he would not use his sword element in the battle. At this point, according to the usual script, Liquorguard should have nodded in agreement with the military governor's battle method. Then, after the usual battle etiquette, the duel would officially begin. However, Liquorguard became the first sword wielder to object to the duel. She said that she was also a sword master and that she wanted to defeat the military governor in a duel between sword masters. In other words, Liquorguard wanted to defeat her opponent with her own swordsmanship, just like the military governor did. It was obvious that the military governor was a little surprised by this request. But after a short moment of consideration, he said that he could accept Liquorguard's suggestion. Just when the military governor thought that he could start the duel, Liquorguard made a new request. This Liquorguard actually said that she wanted to fight fair and square and obtain a fair and square victory. That was why she didn't use her sword element in the duel. She wanted to compete with the military governor in pure swordsmanship. The military governor decisively refused. The military governor said that he chose this duel to hone his swordsmanship. If Liquorguard didn't use her sword element, the military governor wouldn't be able to hone his swordsmanship. This duel would be a waste of time. The military governor's words made Liquorguard go berserk. This was because there was a hidden meaning in his words. The military governor said that a simple duel with Liquorguard wouldn't be able to hone his swordsmanship. It was obvious that Liquorguard's swordsmanship was too different from his level. She wasn't even qualified to be his opponent. This made Liquorguard go berserk. Liquorguard repeatedly asked the military governor to have a fair duel with her. However, the military governor refused without hesitation. When he was about to leave the arena, Liquorguard suddenly said, "You coward! You must be afraid of losing to me. I, Liquorguard Dracula, swear in the name of my ancestors that if you can defeat me, I will become your subordinate in the game and listen to all your orders. I will never go back on my word." Liquorguard's words made the military governor stop in his tracks. Instead, he turned around to confirm with her, "Is what you said true? Words are spoken. Words are spoken. Neither old nor young." Liquorguard said proudly, "All right, let's fight." The military governor nodded, agreeing to this fair duel. In just 3 minutes, Liquorguard realized how ridiculous and ignorant her promise was. She was as fragile as a quail in front of the military governor's starry sky of swordsmanship. Not to mention resisting, Liquorguard couldn't even see where the military governor's sword was. In just a short minute, she had to endure more than 200 attacks from the military governor without being able to retaliate even once. Fortunately, the energy of Liquorguard's personal shield was strong enough. Otherwise, it would not have lasted more than 3 minutes. At most, it would only take 1 minute for the military governor to break through Liquorguard's personal shield. However, there was not much difference between 3 minutes and 1 minute. It was a complete and utter defeat. Forget it. As long as you free Dame Jean and let me have a good fight with her, then we can forget about this matter. I'll pretend I didn't hear your promise. I won't post the recording on the forum anyway. The military governor saw Liquorguard's gloomy expression and took the initiative to tell Liquorguard that he was willing to give up on the promise she made. Don't look down on me too much, military governor. I, Liquorguard, am a man of my word. I will never go back on my word. From now on, I am your subordinate in the game. Although Liquorguard was defeated, she still maintained her arrogance. The military governor could not help but nod in approval. He felt that Liquorguard was a promising talent. "All right, since you have broken out of prison and fulfilled your promise to be my subordinate, I order you to release Lady Jean," the military governor said to Liquorguard. "Wait." Liquorguard seemed unwilling to accept her defeat. Her eyes were still burning with the flames of battle. I have overestimated myself. I rarely fight without using sword essence. That's why I lost to you. However, I have yet to use my true strength. I believe that as long as I use Jean's skills in battle, I will definitely be able to defeat you. Lycurgard said. Yes, I have already said that you can use sword essence in battle. The military governor could not help but frown. Did Lycurgard not understand human language? I have also said that I want to defeat you fair and square. So, I hope that you can also use sword essence and have a fair battle. It turned out that Lycurgard had such an idea. There is no need for that. Have you forgotten that during the 8 Cities Conference, you were already defeated by my sword when you used sword essence? There is no need for such a battle. The military governor refused again. He then directly blocked Lycurgard's path of retreat. Don't forget, you are already my subordinate in the game. You have to listen to my orders. Don't make such a meaningless request. This is not a meaningless request. Back then, it was you who... Lycurgard touched her pair of huge opies. Her eyes were so anxious that tears almost flowed out. It was obvious that she blamed the military governor for attacking her opies crazily during the battle, which led to her defeat. Hearing Lycurgard's words, the military governor could not help but blush. At that time, the difference between his sword essence and Lycurgard's was too huge. Therefore, he had no choice but to use such an unpresentable method. It was only natural that Lycurgard would not accept her defeat because she was resentful. Seeing that the military governor did not speak, Lycurgard seemed to want to reject her like before. Therefore, Lycurgard decided to go all out and once again put her life at stake. If you can defeat me, not only will I be your subordinate in the game, but I will also be your subordinate in real life and listen to your orders. The military governor's eyes lit up when he heard this. According to Gohan's plan for his life, it was indeed time for him to consider recruiting his own sword-bearers in real life and build his own army. After all, apart from the few Jindi during the Great Destruction, every Emperor's sword-level sword-bearers had their own powerful army. Alright, Lycurgard, this silly girl, was betting her entire life. Chapter 941. After fighting with Lycurgard again, Gohan had to admit that she had improved a lot in the past 3 months. Her strength was no longer the same as when she was at the 8 Cities tournament. Unfortunately, it was useless because Gohan had also improved a lot in the past 3 months. Not only had his sword essence in the game increased by 4 times, reaching 80,000 quarks of sword essence, but Gohan's own swordsmanship had also improved greatly. So compared to the 8 Cities tournament, Lycurgard was defeated even faster. Moreover, Gohan did not use any opportunistic moves like attacking his opponent's Opie. He used one terrifying sword move after another to completely disintegrate Lycurgard. Moreover, after Gohan used sword essence, his attack power increased by many times. It didn't even take Gohan 3 minutes to defeat Lycurgard with his sword in just 1 minute. He left Lycurgard to fall to the ground alone, feeling lost. Are you satisfied now? You can spar with me according to my request. Gohan walked in front of Lycurgard and said to her. Lycurgard did not say anything. She felt as if she had been completely broken by Gohan. Forget it. Why don't you take a good rest today? I'll come back to you tomorrow. Seeing Lycurgard's state, Gohan knew that she could no longer fight with him. Just as Gohan was about to leave, the holy sword of Jin in Lycurgard's hand suddenly turned into a bright light and appeared in front of Gohan in the form of a girl in armor. Greetings, Dame Jean d'Arc. Gohan saluted the young lady. Didn't you want to fight me? Lady Jean stared at Gohan with bright eyes. Come on. I'll satisfy you now. Let's fight. I'll use my full strength, and you won't use sword essence. That's exactly what I wanted. Gohan nodded. Since Lady Jean took the initiative to spar with him, Gohan naturally had no reason to refuse. But you have to promise me a bet. Jeanne d'Arc was indeed worthy of being the sword mistress of Lycurgard. This was the third wager of the competition. What bet? Gohan asked curiously. From Gohan's point of view, Lycurgard had already lost both in the game and in real life. What else could she possibly have? If I win this battle, then everything Lycurgard has promised you will be nullified. Lycurgard will regain her freedom, and you will no longer have any relationship with her. If I lose, then Lycurgard will recognize you as her father. All of her, including her flesh, will be yours. I can even tell you this news. Lycurgard only needs 20,000 quarks of sword essence in reality to become a spirit sword level sword bearer. And once she meets the sword essence requirement of a spirit sword level sword bearer, she will definitely be able to synchronize with my real body in reality. Are you satisfied with these conditions? Hearing Jeanne d'Arc's words, the military governor was indeed very satisfied. This was simply an irresistible condition. Not to mention anything else, just Lycurgard's surging body alone was enough for the military governor to recoup his losses. What's more, Lycurgard was about to become a spirit sword level sword bearer in reality, and with the guarantee of Jeanne d'Arc's consciousness fragment, this almost meant that Lycurgard could 100% successfully synchronize with Jeanne d'Arc in reality and become a spirit sword level sword bearer. In 5 days, no matter how many times I challenge you, as long as I can defeat you within 5 days, I win this bet. What do you think? The military governor asked Jeanne d'Arc. But Jeanne d'Arc was about to admit it, but she was interrupted by the military governor. You are just Lycurgard's sword mistress. You are not qualified to make decisions for Lycurgard. That's why I hope it's Lycurgard herself who promises me this, and not you, Dame Jeanne. Jeanne d'Arc's decision is my Arc's decision. We are one. At the same time, Lycurgard, who had suffered a blow, seemed to have recovered her willpower. She stood up firmly and said to Gohan, "Okay." Gohan nodded. This new bet was officially established. Then, just like the previous challenge launched by the military governor, after a few hours of hard fighting, the military governor, who did not use his sword element, was defeated by Jeanne d'Arc. Lycurgard thought that the other party would be eager to challenge her again the next day for the sake of the bet. But to Lycurgard's surprise, not only did he not appear on the second day, but the military governor also did not appear on the third and fourth day. It was not until the 5th day that the military governor contacted Lycurgard in the last few hours and said that the battle could start again. "Why didn't you come to me a few days ago?" Lycurgard asked the military governor curiously before the battle began. "There's a problem in reality. Some ignorant Yuenko came to die, and I've already killed them." The military governor shrugged and said, "In fact, in the past 3 days, the Wu people suddenly launched a strange attack on the Zhou-Tian star battle formation. The reason why this attack was a little strange was because the Wu people's battle at the beginning was very loud. The entire Wu people's army of tens of thousands of troops pressed forward, as if they were going to fight to the death with the humans. But the problem was that these Wu people's attacking troops did not have a Grand Magus to hold the line. All the Grand Magi were still in a state of disappearance. Moreover, this time, the Wu people's attack was very sudden, and they also retreated very suddenly. When the front line at Shanhai Pass was in a precarious situation and the Guardian's mansion was about to give the order to give up the few areas guarding the outermost area, the shamans who still had the upper hand retreated without any hesitation. They even gave up on the areas that they thought they could take down with just a little more effort. Because his Shi-Sing garrison was the front line of the battlefield, the sudden attack forced the military governor to temporarily leave the game world and lead his ancient sword wielders to defend the city. After the Wu people retreated, he guarded the city for a few days, and when he was sure that the Wu people would not launch another surprise attack, he re-entered the game. Although this was undoubtedly a great victory, it seriously raised the suspicions of the Shanhai Pass and the Sword Committee headquarters. The Wu people's abnormal behavior made people suspect that the Wu people were brewing a new conspiracy. Therefore, under the deployment of the Sun Star Garrison and the Titan Star Garrison, all kinds of sword wielders accepted reconnaissance missions, trying to figure out what kind of conspiracy the Wu people were brewing. Of course, this had nothing to do with Guhan for the time being. Guhan's full attention was still on how to perfect his chaos sword art. He rushed to go online during the last period of the 5th day and launched a battle with Liquorguard that would determine her freedom and fate. It was an extremely fierce battle. In order to prevent her sword wielder from becoming someone else's slave, or rather, her daughter, Jean could be said to have used the most powerful swordsmanship in her several reincarnations. After that, when Jean's true self retrieved this fragment of consciousness and completely read the entire battle memory, she had to admit that even Jean's true self couldn't do this in reality. The energy of Guhan and Jean's personal shield decreased like 2 spirals as the battle continued. The gap between the two of them was no more than 3% of the personal shield's energy. When there was only 5% of the personal shield's energy left, Jean finally used her almost self-destructive ultimate skill, My Lord's Descent. At the cost of reducing the sword element limit of the sword wielder by 10,000 points and not being able to transform into a sword maiden for a month, she obtained the powerful effect of Angel's Descent, which increased all attributes by 10 times. Both Jean and Liquorguard felt that after using this skill, they would definitely win and defeat this unbelievably powerful human. However, in the next few minutes, Liquorguard and Jean saw the most dazzling sword in their lives. It was a sword art that was like a flying fairy. Came inexplicably and disappeared inexplicably. Liquorguard and Jean did not even know what happened. The remaining 5% of the personal shield on Jean's body collapsed in an instant. At this time, the military governor's personal shield only had 2% left. Let's call this skill Chaos Flying Fairy. After muttering this sentence, the military governor fell to the ground like a corpse and fell into a deep coma. He was then forced to go offline by the game. Liquorguard and Jean were left dumbfounded. What a pity! Just one more step. But that Chaos Flying Fairy was so beautiful. Liquorguard clasped her hands in front of her chest and said as if she was praying, "Damn it! I've let you down. I shouldn't have continued this bet with that damned human. I've caused you to completely fall into it." Jean's face was full of regret. There were even a few drops of tears in her eyes. "It's okay. This is a decision made by both of us. We need to bear it together." Liquorguard pulled Jean into her arms and gently kissed Jean's eyes, kissing Jean's tears into her mouth. This was truly a scene as beautiful as a lily in full bloom. "Wait, Liquorguard. We might not have lost yet." Jean was excited. She pointed at the clock on the arena. It was now 12:10. Jean remembered that her battle with Guhan had ended less than 10 minutes ago. In other words, this victory was actually achieved on the 6th day. If one were to strictly look at the words, then it could be said that Liquorguard had obtained the final victory. That was why she was so excited. No. A loss is a loss. I'm not someone who can't afford to lose. Surprisingly, even though there was such a legitimate and perfect excuse for her to get rid of her terrible fate and become a father to a strange man, Liquorguard simply rejected this excuse. "That's really your style." Jean looked at Liquorguard with an expression that was unknown whether it was hatred or admiration. Then, the recording ended. The audience on the forum were silent. Chapter 942. There were 2 reasons for the silence of the spectators. The first was naturally because of Liquorguard's promise. Even when she could have taken back her freedom in the end, she gave up because of the promise in her heart. The spectators in these forums asked themselves if they were in that environment, they would not have been able to do this no matter what. The second reason was that they were silent because of the military governors, Chaos Flying Immortal, at the end. In the absence of the sword element, this sword had become so terrifying. If the military governor used the sword element, wouldn't it be possible for even an immortal sword wielder to be defeated by the sword of the military governor? It was said that a few days later, the sword spirit, known as the #1 swordmaster, saw this video. After a few hours of silence in the room, he said to his friend, "From today onwards, the #1 swordmaster is not him, the sword spirit, but the military governor in the game." With the words of the perplexed sword spirit, the video of the last battle with Jean quickly spread among all humans. It was said that almost all the sword bearers had seen this video, even those sword bearers at the immortal sword tier were no exception. In the end, more than 90% of humans in the 8 base cities had seen this video, except for Jerusalem, which was difficult to calculate. Unexpectedly, the biggest beneficiary of this video was not the military governor, but Liquorguard. Because of Liquorguard's perfect performance of keeping her promise, coupled with her pair of huge opies that could suffocate a person to death, she instantly became a goddess in the eyes of all men and the representative of social sincerity. Almost overnight, she gained millions of fans, and the number of fans was still increasing. It could be said that she had replicated the legend of the rise of the military governor. At this time, more players were paying attention to the next battle of the military governor. Because there was only one spiritual sword wielder left who was ranked above Jean, everyone was almost certain that the military governor would definitely challenge that sword wielder. Even the sword wielder himself was secretly looking forward to the challenge of the military governor. He even told his friend that when the time came to challenge him, he would definitely beat the military governor so that even his mother wouldn't recognize him, so that everyone would know that not using the sword element was a crooked way. It was a pity that this sword wielder never received a challenge message from the military governor. At first, the audience thought that this was just a replay of the previous battle with Liquorguard, and that the video would automatically appear after a few days. However, after waiting for a month, there were no new recordings. Only then did the spectators vaguely feel that the Admiral's journey of challenge had come to an end. The lively forum gradually returned to its peaceful state. However, the entire human world had changed because of the challenge of the military governor. The 8 base cities opened 8 swordmaster teaching classes at the same time, and the first generation of ordinary people who could fight with Yuan Ko were being trained. Of course, these had nothing to do with Gohan. At this time, Gohan was fighting in a dungeon. This was a dungeon that had never appeared in the history of the game, and it was also the second dungeon that Gohan conquered in a completely unfamiliar situation. After defeating Jean Dark that day, the unconscious Gohan was forced out of the game. He only fully recovered after resting for 3 days in the real world. But this was valuable, because Gohan continued with the first move, Primal Chaos Split the Heavens, the second move, Primal Chaos Stars, and finally created his third move, Primal Chaos Flying Immortal. The creation of Chaos Sky Splitter greatly improved Gohan's swordsmanship once again. Gohan even felt that if he met Gilgamesh again, he would not be as helpless as before. Gohan could at least fight with Gilgamesh for a few hundred rounds. However, the appearance of Chaos Sky Splitter also made Gohan understand that the way he fought with the Lady Swordmaster without using the sword element was like the way he fought with the Wu people. It had lost its purpose, and it could no longer help Gohan further improve his swordsmanship. Gohan had to find a stronger opponent to fight against. Logically speaking, this was not a difficult task. Next, Gohan could use the identity of military governor to challenge those fairy sword wielders. However, he never expected that the Sword Committee would send an email directly to Gohan's personal terminal through Tomono Kakashi. The email clearly stated that Gohan was not allowed to challenge any Legend of the Sword and Fairy-level swordsman in the game. If Gohan dared to challenge any Legend of the Sword and Fairy-level swordsman in the game, the Sword Committee would use its authority to ban the commander's account for 3 years. As for why Gohan was banned, the email did not explain clearly. However, when Gohan browsed through the various messages on the forum, He could roughly guess the reason why the Sword Committee did this. The reason was very simple. The Sword Committee was afraid that there would really be fairy sword wielders who would be defeated by military governor without using the sword element. This would undoubtedly cause a huge impact on the entire system of sword wielders. Military governor had defeated countless spirit sword wielders without using the sword element. This had broken the common sense that the Sword Committee had spent hundreds of years to shape. That was, the sword element is king, and the swordsmanship is only auxiliary. Once this common sense was broken, there would inevitably be some sword-bearers who had no talent but were ambitious enough to think that they had someone like the commander. Even though he was only a famed sword-level sword-bearer, he was able to defeat a spirit sword-level sword-bearer. Practicing swordsmanship itself was not a bad thing. The bad thing was that these sword-bearers were blindly arrogant and wanted to fight Yuenko hand-to-hand, just like the sword master after mastering a lousy swordsmanship. In the end, they would die in vain in Yuenko's hands. This was not an alarmist matter. The Sword Committee had publicly announced 3 such incidents. The 3 idiots practiced according to the video of the military governor for a few days before going out of the city to practice swordsmanship with Yuan-ko. Then, 2 of them died tragically on the spot. The last one was returned by a passing patrol team and was so frightened that he became mentally weak and was receiving long-term psychological treatment. This was only one of the reasons. The more important reason was that the emotions of the ordinary people in the 8 base cities would be stirred up by the behavior of the military governor. Originally, after these ordinary people found that they could not synchronize with the Sword Lady, they could only accept the unequal treatment in the city and could only secretly envy the privileges that those sword wielders had. However, once they found out that they could obtain the same combat power as the sword wielders through another method, the whole society would definitely be in chaos. However, the Sword Committee reacted quickly. After discovering this sign, they immediately established the Sword Master teaching class. They used the method of blocking the ordinary people's outburst of passion and made most of them realize that they were still ordinary people after all and did not have the talent to practice swordsmanship. At the same time, they could also discover those ordinary people who truly had the talent to practice swordsmanship and become the new generation of combat power. Although this matter had become a good thing, it could not be done too hastily. It had to be guided slowly and patiently. Once they all defeated the sword wielders of the immortal sword realm, the ordinary people's passion would definitely rise again, and the whole situation would really be difficult to control. In summary, this was the reason why Gohan believed that the Sword Committee would prohibit him from challenging the sword wielders of the immortal sword realm. After understanding this, Gohan no longer had any resentment towards the Sword Committee. After all, the Sword Committee was also considering the overall situation of mankind. At the same time, he was probably the first person in human history to be prohibited by the Sword Committee from challenging the sword wielders of the immortal sword realm. This was an unprecedented honor. Although Gohan understood the Sword Committee in the end, Gohan could not give up on training his swordsmanship. Since the way to challenge the sword wielders of the immortal sword realm was blocked, Gohan had to find a new way. After thinking about it, Gohan realized that this opponent was still in the Sword Lady Online, in the famed Sword-level Swordsman Instance Dungeon. Although all the main bosses in the famed Sword-level Swordsman Instance Dungeon could be defeated by famed Sword-level Swordsman Instance Dungeon, there were actually some story bosses and hidden bosses that swordsmen could not defeat. The simplest example was the King Arthur's Betrayal Instance Dungeon. In it, 3 of the 10 kings of the Martyr's Palace appeared. These 3 bosses were all universe-level Yuan-ko. At that time, the weak Gohan could only rely on all kinds of tricks and tricks. In the end, he was even forced to escape with a nuclear bomb. However, now that he was also a famed sword-level swordsman, Gohan could challenge this instance dungeon in a different way. System notification. Player Military Governor, welcome to the King Arthur's Betrayal Instance Dungeon. Quest objective: find the imprisoned King Arthur and bring him back to Yanjing Bay City. System notification: main quest has been updated. Quest 1: search the battlefield. Your team has discovered a high-energy reaction nearby. It is suspected that there is a battle between Yuan Ko and the swordsman. Please find and arrive at the quest location within 10 minutes. If the quest is not completed within 10 minutes, the instance dungeon will fail. System notification: special notice: if you encounter a wandering Yuan Ko, please kill them immediately. Otherwise, they will issue a warning and attract all the Yuan Ko in the stronghold to attack you. Hearing these familiar system notifications, Gohan couldn't help but feel the urge to cry. He didn't think that he would be able to return to this instance dungeon after a few months. However, he was no longer the same person he was a few months ago. When he first entered this instance dungeon, he was only an ancient sword-level swordsman. Now, however, he had entered this instance dungeon as a famed sword-level swordsman. More importantly, his true strength had increased by more than 100 or even 1,000 times compared to before. Although Gohan had written an extremely detailed strategy on the forum to teach other players how to clear this instance dungeon, this strategy had also earned Gohan tens of millions of yuan. However, this time, Gohan didn't plan to clear this instance dungeon according to his strategy. He wanted to go crazy and use a method similar to a nuclear explosion to detonate the entire instance dungeon. Chapter 943. According to the strategy that Gohan provided to the players, they had to pass through T3 in order to reach parking lot P2 as quickly as possible. This was because Terminal T3 was filled with Flood Dragon level Yuan Bandit. If they relied on killing their way through Terminal T3, it would inevitably take a lot of time. Therefore, in the strategy, Gohan suggested that the players endure the damage from these Yuan Ko. As long as they rushed out of the range of T3, these Yuan Ko would not chase after them. This was indeed a very effective method. They all used this suggestion from the military governor to quickly pass through T3. However, this time, Gohan did not intend to pass through T3 according to the method described in the game strategy. He intended to use a more effective method. Gohan held the Juzi sword in his hand and injected 5,000 quarks of sword essence into it. An explosive aura surged out of Gohan's body and instantly filled the entire world. 9 swords of mysterious heaven, waterfall golden chrysanthemum. With a single thought from Gohan's lips, the dazzling golden chrysanthemum formed by more than 50 sword energies instantly struck the entire T3 terminal. This T3 terminal, which had stood for 1,000 years, was cut into pieces by the sword energies like tofu. At the same time, the dozens of Yuan bandits in the T3 terminal were also directly cut into 2 pieces by the sword energies. Done. After releasing the waterfall golden chrysanthemum, the military governor walked into T3 with great ease. Along the way, he saw the dismembered corpses of Yuan Ko. These were all Yuan Ko who were equivalent to famed swordsmen. They were the opponents that Gohan could not fight back at all and could only face head-on. Now, with a single ultimate skill, all of these Yuan Ko were dead and could no longer stop Gohan's advance. The moment Gohan passed through T3, the T3 terminal, which had become dilapidated after 1,000 years, could no longer support its old body under the destructive attack of the waterfall golden chrysanthemum. The entire building collapsed as if it was facing a magnitude 12 earthquake, and finally turned into a pile of dust. Gohan did not care about the fate of T3 terminal. He leisurely entered the parking lot of P2 and successfully found Shuda and Ardwolf, who were preparing to kill their opponent. "Who are you?" Gohan could ignore the collapse of T3 terminal, but Shuda could not pretend that he did not see it. He stared at Gohan, who was walking towards him with extreme vigilance. His hands tightly gripped the golden chisel spear in his hand, and the spearhead gave up on Ardwolf and pointed directly at Gohan's body. "Is it necessary?" I just want this process to end as soon as possible. The juicy sword in Gohan's hand trembled and a beam of sword energy struck Shuda's body with lightning-like speed. You! Shuda did not even have the time to utter out the second word before his body broke apart like a broken vase. In the end, it became a pile of minced meat. The dragon-class Yuan Ko, whom Hong Yu and Heavenly Reliance had once needed to work together to quickly kill, was killed by one beam of sword energy. Hello. I am Ardwolf. You must have found this place through the message I left behind with the sword in the stone, right? I am very grateful to all of you for your assistance. Please accept my gratitude. Ardwolf stood up and thanked Gohan according to his script. Gohan had heard those words countless times since a few months ago. Goodbye. Ardwolf had yet to figure out why the person who came to save him would say goodbye to him. Did he not want to find out the next part of the quest from him? Next, Ardwolf's head was separated from his neck, and he became a corpse like Shuda. I am sorry. I do not want to waste time. Gohan looked at Ardwolf's corpse and said quietly. Gohan did not come to this instant's dungeon to reminisce with Ardwolf. He did not even want to see Artoria again. He had his own reasons for coming here. He did not want to waste time on the details of the instant's dungeon. At that moment, those details were meaningless to the current Gohan. Gohan only needed to be like a bulldozer as he bulldozed through this instant's dungeon. Arg! Arg! Countless screams rang out beside Gohan. The dragon-class Yuan Ko attacking Gohan were easily cut in half by Gohan's sword. He did not waste a second slash. The dragon-class Yuan Ko that once required the cooperation of 6 experts to kill were now as insignificant as ants on the ground. Other than being used to show off Gohan's strength, they had no other value. System Notice: Quest 4, Clear the surface of Terminal T1 has been completed. Your party has successfully killed all the Yuan Ko and ensured that no messages were transmitted to the underground parking lot. Quest progress 20%. Main quest updated. System Notice: Quest 5, Underground Labyrinth. The underground parking lot of Terminal T1 has been turned into a labyrinth. Please pass through the labyrinth and arrive at the dimensional altar. Please pay attention to the time. Wasting too much time in the underground labyrinth may cause negative changes. System Notice: Special Notice: Please strictly abide by the rules of the underground labyrinth. Those who violate the rules will be severely punished. There were a total of 4 passageways that led to the dimensional altar in Terminal T1. The one that Gohan and his party had entered was the one where they had to take part in the college entrance exam like the students before the apocalypse. Gohan had advised normal players to enter this passageway because the other passageways were blocked by the powerful Yuan Ko. It was not a passageway that ordinary famed swordsmen could clear. However, that was meaningless to Gohan. Gohan chose the passageway that was closest to him and entered the underground passageway. Human! How dare you disturb the slumber of the great Arthas? A knight riding on a tall horse appeared before Gohan. However, this horse wasn't an ordinary horse. Instead, it was a skeletal horse covered in steel armor forged from cold iron. The rider on this horse wasn't an ordinary human either. Instead, it was an undead whose skin was so pale that one could see the bones underneath. This was a Death Knight, an undead creature created by the powerful Lich King Yuan Ko. It had the freezing ability of Absolute Zero, the blood-sucking ability that surpassed vampires, and the undead summoning ability that was as terrifying as the Death Mages. In short, this was an extremely powerful Yuan Ko. The information on his personal terminal clearly showed that this Yuan Ko was at the meteor level. Killing such an opponent was undoubtedly an impossible task for a famed sword-level swordsman. This was the path closest to the dimensional altar. As long as he defeated the Death Knight and passed through the room where the Death Knight was, Gohan would be able to reach the dimensional altar directly. It was undoubtedly much simpler than the other 3 paths. However, this was also the most difficult path. In the eyes of 99% of the famed swordsmen, the meteor-level Yuan Ko was an existence that could not be defeated. Even if 6 famed swordsmen joined forces, it would still be impossible to defeat this meteor-level Yuan Ko. Gohan still vaguely remembered that there was such a passage in the dungeon information given to him by Yaoguang. The team led by Wondrous Pen had initially chosen this path to advance to the dimensional altar. Unfortunately, when the 6 top-notch famed swordsmen saw that their opponent was a Death Knight at the Meteor Realm, they could only smile wryly. After a difficult battle with the Death Knight, Arthas, for 30 minutes, the 6 famed swordsmen were directly sent out of the dungeon. Arthas still had 60% of his HP left. This completely put an end to the idea of Wondrous Pen and the others trying to pass through Arthas. In fact, in the following months, some famed sword-bearers who pursued unconventional achievements formed a team to attack Arthas. They constantly researched ways to defeat Arthas, and in the end they succeeded in defeating Arthas. However, this team of famed swordsmen who defeated Arthas were the best among the famed swordsmen. At the same time, their composition was very unique. There were even some very unorthodox sword maidens who appeared specifically to deal with Arthas. These sword maidens were very weak when completing the other quests in the King Arthur's Betrayal Instance dungeon. Therefore, after defeating Arthas, this team of famed sword maidens were unable to clear the instance dungeon. However, this was not a problem for this team. Their original goal was to defeat Arthas. Whether or not they could clear the instance dungeon was not within their consideration. At this time, this powerful meteor-level Yuan Ko, who needed 6 famed swordsmen to defeat, was facing a challenge from a mere famed swordsman. A human? It's been a long time since I've smelled such nostalgia. I really miss the days when I was a human, even though those days made me feel so disgusted. Arthas rode on her skeletal warhorse and looked down at Gohan. Withered human. The merciful king has decided to grant you eternal life. Become a skeleton warrior under my command. Meteor-level Yuan Ko? I wonder how his combat power is compared to Jin's. Gohan did not care about what the Death Knight said at all. Instead, he looked at the Death Knight's body with great interest. He secretly estimated whether the Death Knight could become his opponent and help him improve his Chaos Sword technique. Return. My skeleton warrior. The Death Knight Arthas directly slashed at Gohan's neck. This sword attack was as fast as a bullet in the eyes of ordinary people, but in Gohan's eyes, it was like slow motion. Seems like you're not as good as Queen Jean. Gohan gently blocked with the Juzi sword in his hand, skillfully pushing Arthas's giant sword to the other side. At the same time, his body flashed and appeared behind Arthas. At the same time, he slashed through the gap in Arthas's armor, leaving a deep wound on Arthas's body. Weak. Still too weak, Gohan said. Chapter 944. That's impossible. You're just a famed sword-grade swordsman. Although he was already dead, Arthas' eyes were still filled with disbelief. This powerful Death Knight had finally turned into a pile of broken bones and was absorbed by the dimensional vortex. It's not enough, it's still not enough. Looks like the fallen sword-grade Yuan Ko can no longer improve my swordsmanship. Gohan had a cold expression on his face. In the battle with Arthas, Gohan was like the other spirit sword-grade sword maidens. He did not use his sword essence from start to finish. Even so, Gohan only spent less than an hour and a half to kill Arthas. Arthas was not an ordinary Yuan Ko. He was a true fallen sword-grade Yuan Ko. Gohan could defeat his opponent without using sword essence. So, if Gohan used sword essence, how much stronger would he be? What was even more terrifying was that Gohan's improvement had not reached its limit. The real limit would probably be when Gohan completely perfected his Chaos Sword technique. When that time came, Gohan would be looking forward to facing Gilgamesh again. Gohan wanted to return all the humiliation he had suffered to this opponent. Unfortunately, Gilgamesh was already dead. The system notification. Quest 5. Underground labyrinth completed. Your party has arrived at the dimensional altar. Quest progress 40%. Main quest updated. System notification. Quest 6. Save King Arthur. King Arthur Artoria Pendragon has been bound by magic. Please break the magic binding and save the controlled King Arthur. Guhan couldn't help but let out a sigh when he saw King Arthur Artoria Pendragon, who was wearing a snow-white wedding gown and had a seductive butt. He walked towards the dimensional altar. I wonder if everyone still remembers that this dimensional altar is actually a very dangerous trap. The surroundings of the dimensional altar were filled with dimensional turbulence. No matter who it was, once they touched these dimensional turbulence, they would be torn to pieces in an instant. Even a spirit sword-grade swordsman was no exception, let alone a famed sword-grade swordsman. Even if Gohan's strength had increased by a terrifying amount, it was only in terms of swordsmanship. In terms of physical fitness, Gohan's physical fitness was still that of an ordinary famed sword-grade swordsman. The Juzi sword's protective shield was still that of a famed sword-grade swordsman. Steel Centipede, who had hundreds of thousands of quark sword essence and had top-notch defensive abilities and skills, only had 4% of its protective shield energy left in the face of the dimensional turbulence. Although the Juzi sword's defensive ratio far exceeded Steelbang's by 2 times, the sword essence in Guhan's body was less than a third of Steelbang's. In other words, the defensive ability of Guhan's Juzi sword's close-fitting shield was simply not comparable to Steelbang's. If Gohan chose to face the dimensional turbulence head-on, Gohan would probably die on the spot with the Juzi sword's ability. Of course, if Gohan was willing to use the starting point sword, it would be a different story. But for some reason, the game did not scan the starting point sword's ability to use the upper limit of sword essence as a protective shield energy. Therefore, the starting point sword's performance here might not be as practical as the Juzi sword. In this case, it seemed that Gohan could only follow the method written in his guide to remove the dimensional turbulence of the dimensional altar. According to the method described in Gohan's guide, 5 people needed to cooperate from different directions to remove the magic runes on the arena and make the dimensional turbulence disappear. However, Gohan was alone now. It was impossible for him to gather 5 people. Even if he could gather 5 people, Gohan did not want to use such a complicated method. Gohan stepped onto the dimensional altar without hesitation. He did not even look at the magic runes on the altar as he casually stepped on it. 4 spatial turbulence instantly appeared beside Gohan, preparing to slash at Gohan's body. However, Gohan did not panic. He tapped the Juzi sword a few times in the air, and the spatial turbulence that had been aimed at Gohan seemed to be disrupted by something. The 4 turbulence collided at the same time, and the powerful energy collision instantly triggered a riot in the entire dimensional altar. All the dimensional turbulence exploded like a bomb. Boom! A loud sound rang out. The entire dimensional altar was razed to the ground by the explosion of the dimensional turbulence. The entire altar disappeared, and a deep pit the size of half a basketball court appeared in the ground. However, although the altar had disappeared, the person on the altar was safe and sound. Gohan had appeared in the safe zone of the temple at some point in time, carrying the unconscious Artoria in his arms. Amazing! Amazing! You were actually able to use your sword chi to shake the entire space and affect the path of the dimensional turbulence, ultimately detonating everything. Your swordsmanship is truly terrifying. It's no wonder that Arthas, who was at the door, died under your sword. Furthermore, you were able to rescue Artoria and bring her to a safe place within a single second of the dimensional turbulence's impact. I'm afraid that your Excellency's movement technique is one of the rarest in the human world. It's really hard to imagine how such a powerful famed swordsman like your Excellency was born. In my life, I'm afraid I've only seen 2 human swordsmen reach such a terrifying level. One had red lips, white teeth, and a pale face, but was extraordinarily handsome. The one wearing a pointy wizard hat and a black wizard robe stood in front of Gohan in admiration. This was naturally Artoria's teacher, the meteor-level Grand Mage Yuan Ko Merlin, whom Gohan still couldn't figure out which side he was on. "Do you want to fight me?" Gohan squinted at Grand Mage Merlin. I don't dare. Grand Mage Merlin waved his hands. What a joke. Even Arthas was defeated by him. Wouldn't he be courting death if he went over? Then I'm leaving. Gohan raised the Juzi sword in his hand and used Chaos Splits the Heavens. A rainbow-like sword chi shot into the sky, creating a huge hole in the ceiling of the Divine Hall. Then, Gohan directly jumped out of the hole. Boom, boom, boom. My dear elf goddess, why is the script so messed up this time? With such a terrifying guy interfering, will there be any unforeseen events? Grand Mage Merlin couldn't help but shiver when he saw the large hole in the ceiling. This underground temple was built using ancient technology. Even universe-level Yuan Ko would have to spend a lot of effort to break through the ceiling. This human was only a famed swordsman, but his sword energy could actually break through the entire ceiling. This kind of strength was no different from the 10 kings of the Martyr's Palace. Will Hitler and the others fail miserably? Grand Mage Merlin muttered to himself. At this moment, he realized that the entire situation seemed to be completely out of his control. I didn't expect Chaos Flying Immortal to have such a terrifying power when combined with sword essence. I'm afraid the power of that sword just now has already surpassed the power of 9 swords of mysterious heaven, sword battling heaven, at the same level of sword essence. Gohan himself was also surprised by the power of that sword. 9 swords of mysterious heaven, sword battling heaven, was the move with the most terrifying single-target damage in the 9 swords of mysterious heaven, sword battling heaven. It allowed Gohan to burst out with more than 10 times the damage. It was equivalent to Gohan's trump card. However, when Gohan used the newly created Chaos Flying Immortal for the first time with 10,000 quarks of sword essence, the power that burst out shocked Gohan. This was because the power of this sword was also more than 10 times the damage that 9 swords of mysterious heaven, sword battling heaven, could cause with 10,000 quarks of sword essence. Adding the two together, Gohan could burst out with a sword that was 100 times more powerful than a normal move. With this move, Chaos Flying Immortal, Gohan could almost declare that he was already invincible among sword bearers at the spiritual sword level when he used sword essence. This was only in the game, and Gohan only had 70 to 80,000 quarks of sword essence. If it was in reality with Gohan's more than 400,000 quarks of sword essence, even if it was a sword bearer at the immortal sword level, if the other party did not use the Gate of the Void, perhaps only the top few would be able to fight with Gohan head-on. I didn't expect just Chaos Flying Immortal to be this terrifying. If I complete all the remaining 4 moves of Chaos Sword Technique, then my Chaos Sword Technique will probably become a sword technique comparable to the Billion Sword Technique and the Yin-Yang Sword Technique ! Gohan thought silently in his heart. In fact, when he developed Chaos Splitting the Heavens, Gohan did not know how many moves the final product of Chaos Sword Technique would have. However, at this moment, a sudden realization surged in Gohan's heart. That was, when Gohan completely completed the Chaos Sword Technique, there should be a total of 7 moves in the Chaos Sword Technique. At this time, Gohan had already created Chaos Splitting the Heavens, Chaos Stars, and Chaos Flying Immortal. These 3 sword moves were Chaos Splitting the Heavens, Chaos Stars, and Chaos Flying Immortal. He was still 4 moves away from completing the Chaos Sword Technique. Just creating the previous 3 moves had already cost Gohan a lot of time and energy. It had also allowed Gohan to achieve the terrifying achievement of being invincible below the spiritual sword level just by relying on his sword technique. According to these conditions, Gohan would probably need to defeat an Emperor Sword level sword bearer in order to completely create the entire Chaos Sword technique. Defeating an Emperor Sword level sword bearer with just sword technique? Gohan could not help but stare at the Juzi sword in his hand and silently asked himself, is this really something that a human can do? Chapter 945. Under the suppression of absolute strength, after nearly half a year, this King Arthur's Betrayal Instance Dungeon, which had forced Gohan to rack his brains, discover all the subtle clues, and use all possible means to complete it, had now become a toy in the hands of a baby in Gohan's eyes. He could easily crush the entire instance dungeon with one foot. The only thing that could make Gohan look forward to it was the opponents that would appear next. According to the dungeon strategy, Gohan should escape at full speed with Artoria and try his best to avoid the 3 universe-level Yuan Ko's pursuit. He absolutely couldn't let the universe-level Yuan Ko catch up to him, or else Gohan would die. Well, that was a matter of a few months ago. For the current Gohan, the only thing he was looking forward to was the 3 universe-level Yuan Kos that were about to arrive. Yes, this was the main reason why Gohan returned to the King Arthur's Betrayal Instance Dungeon. He didn't want to continue his relationship with Artoria, who was in the Instance Dungeon. Gohan's real goal was the 3 universe-level Yuan Kos that were chasing him, and they would become Gohan's best training targets. After the Spirit Sword level sword bearers couldn't help Gohan improve his swordsmanship, Gohan could only place his hope on these universe-level Yuan Kos to train himself. Therefore, after Gohan rescued Artoria, he didn't run far. Instead, he came to an empty ruin, put Artoria's body on his lap, and silently waited for the universe-level Yuan Ko's arrival. At this moment, Artoria's snow-white skin and the simple and elegant wedding dress made her look so charming that Gohan couldn't help but have an impulse. Before entering this instance dungeon, Gohan had a clear goal of completing the dungeon's mission. Plus, he had been fleeing passionately along the way, so Gohan didn't have much time to care about Artoria's beautiful body. Even if he had to take off Artoria's wedding dress for some reason and completely see Artoria's graceful naked body, Gohan didn't have the mood to care about other inexplicable things. But now it was different. Now Gohan had completely given up on completing the mission, and the nearest Nazi king, Hitler, would need at least an hour to rush over. This way, Gohan could quietly accompany the unconscious Artoria for a full hour without any pressure. This hour was enough for Gohan to let his imagination run wild. As for whether or not Gohan did anything to Artoria in this hour, we can discuss this in the future and won't talk about it here. Scum, why didn't you escape? Are you looking down on the Great Reich Chancellor? Seeing the long-awaited appearance of the Third Reich of Germany, Gohan knew that he had watched Artoria fight while his opponent was Hitler, one of the 10 kings of the Valhalla, the Nazi king. Let's fight. Gohan shrugged his shoulders, then straightened his clothes that had slipped a little. He looked at the Third Reich with great interest and said, Hitler's combat power was not that great, but the Third Reich's combat power was amazing, especially its defensive ability. It was unknown what kind of metal the surface of the Third Reich was made of. Without using sword essence, Gohan could only leave a few shallow marks on the surface of the Third Reich's body with his own sword skills. This was like a naughty child taking a key and drawing marks on a shiny car. Although it looked quite annoying, and the 4S shop would often charge a few $1,000s for damage. But in fact, these marks were nothing to a car, and could not affect the performance of the car at all. It was just ugly. The damage that Gohan caused to the Third Reich was probably similar to the scratches on the surface of the car. Although it looked quite powerful, it was actually useless. This was also the limitation of Gohan's pure sword skills. That was, when facing an opponent with extremely strong defense and who could defend from all angles, no matter how good one's swordsmanship was, it would be useless, because solid cold could not attack the opponent's effective parts. Of course, if Gohan used sword essence, the result would be completely different. With the blessing of sword essence, Gohan was confident that he could open a hole in the armor of the Third Reich, and as long as there was a hole that could allow Gohan to enter the armor of the Third Reich, Gohan was confident that he could kill Hitler. After all, no matter how strong a fortress was, it could not withstand damage from the inside. Of course, the Third Reich also could not cause fatal damage to Gohan. This was because Gohan's movement was too flexible, and the Third Reich's attacks were very stiff and rigid. For Gohan, it was a piece of cake to avoid such attacks. However, when the Law Hammurabi also arrived, Gohan's battle came to an end. Facing the attacks of two universe-level Yuan Ko at the same time, Gohan was as fragile as a seagull in a storm. He was easily thrown into the deep sea and was doomed eternally. Then, he was forced to quit the game because he failed the mission. For the next month, Gohan was completely immersed in the King Arthur's Betrayal dungeon. On average, Gohan entered the dungeon more than 10 times a day, which meant that he had to fight more than 10 times with Hitler's Third Reich. In 1 month, that was more than 300 battles, and more than 300 battles were lost. It was different from the previous battles with the Spirit Sword level swordsman. In the battles with the Spirit Sword level swordsman, Gohan's longest battle was 9 consecutive defeats. Finally, he won the 10th time and defeated the Spirit Sword level swordsman. However, after more than 300 battles, not to mention consecutive victories, Gohan didn't even see any progress. This was because Gohan couldn't penetrate the armor of the Third Reich without using the sword element, which meant that Gohan couldn't cause any substantial damage to Hitler. Of course, in this month, Gohan wasn't without result. At least, Gohan's control of his power had improved a lot. Before, the damage that Gohan caused to the Third Reich was like a child holding a key and scratching the paint of a flower car. Now, the damage that Gohan caused to the Third Reich was like an adult holding a pair of sharp scissors. If Gohan's damage to the Third Reich could increase at this rate, then Gohan probably wouldn't be able to penetrate the armor of the Third Reich after 100 years. But even a fool knew that this actually didn't have any meaning, because with the physical fitness of a famous sword-level swordsman, such damage would eventually reach a limit that could no longer be advanced. Even if such a limit didn't exist, Gohan didn't have 100 years to waste in this dungeon. So it stood to reason that after a month of failure, Gohan should give up this stupid thing. Either he should give up and fight with a slightly lower defense Yuan Ko who could break the defense of Gohan, or Gohan should simply change his way of improving his swordsmanship. Anyway, he couldn't fight to the death with the Third Reich like a fool. Don't believe in idioms like how water dripping wears through a stone and an iron pestle grinds a needle. It would take 10,000 years for a drop of water to wear away a stone, and the story of grinding a needle with an iron pestle was a complete joke. This was just a story written by an otaku in the Song dynasty. The credibility of this story was as nonsensical as the novels XX Firmament, XX World, and Sword Maiden written by those web novelists at home. But unexpectedly, Gohan kept persevering. Even if the ending was the same every time, Gohan still persisted. But this wasn't because Gohan was stupid, and it wasn't because Gohan believed in idioms like how an iron pestle grinds a needle and water dripping wears through a stone. It was because Gohan had a vague feeling that the next move of his Chaos Sword technique was hidden on the Third Reich. As long as Gohan could find a way to break the turtle shell of the Third Reich, then Gohan would be able to learn the fourth move of the Chaos Sword technique. Trial by law. You are guilty and deserve to be cut into pieces. Countless swords appeared around Gohan, but these swords didn't seem to have a physical body and were just illusory existences. But these illusory swords made it impossible for Gohan to dodge, because these swords didn't attack Gohan in a physical sense. They were just floating in the air, and Gohan felt a pain from the depths of his body, as if countless swords were cutting into him. His body shield didn't suffer any damage, and he didn't lose any energy, but Gohan's body directly collapsed, turning into minced meat and disappearing from this world. This was how Gohan died for the past month. It was as miserable as a fat pig being cut into pieces. After dying in such a miserable way one day, Gohan was ready to make another effort to challenge Hitler in the game. A group push news caught Gohan's attention. It was a piece of historical and cultural news. It was about a team of swordsmen from Yanjing City who found a book with only a few pages left in the ruins of the ancient city of Qinzhou. The name of the book was already untraceable, and even the content of the book was difficult to analyze from these few pages. Therefore, the Society of Historical and Cultural Research simply took photos of the remaining pages and sent them to all the members of the Society of Historical and Cultural Research, hoping that they could brainstorm and analyze what the book was talking about. Gohan curiously flipped through these few pages. This page seemed to be about a teacher teaching her students. What impressed Gohan the most was that the female teacher was teaching her students what was internal force and how to practice internal force. What is internal force? When a person moves, every movement produces energy and heat, and this energy and heat contains internal force. When a person's pores are closed, sweat can't flow out and heat can't evaporate. When a person moves vigorously, the blood and energy in their body will turn into this heat, and the energy and sweat will be released through the pores. This is the principle of training energy into internal force, which is also internal force. Whether one can hold this internal force or not is the standard of whether one has internal force or not. Internal force can also be trained in the whole body. In the eyes of the Gohan, the logic contained in these words was as unreasonable as a fart. However, what made the Gohan feel extremely uncomfortable was that these words continued to linger in the Gohan's mind. This sentence was like a fishbone stuck in Gohan's mind, making it impossible for Gohan to sleep well. It made Gohan think about this sentence for 3 days and 3 nights. Gohan could feel that this sentence seemed to be hiding some great path of swordsmanship, but Gohan still couldn't figure out what this great path was, and how it should be reflected in his swordsmanship. Chapter 946. On a certain day, Gohan launched the 312th battle against the German Third Reich in more than a month. Of course, this time, Gohan still failed. By the time Emarabi appeared, Gohan had already been cut into pieces by 1,000 blades. If someone could carefully use nano-level high-precision equipment to analyze the traces of this battle, then this person might find that this time, the marks caused by Gohan on the metal armor of the German Third Reich were not deeper than the last 311th battle, but correspondingly weaker. It was just that the weakening was so small that it could only be detected on a nano-level scale. In the 323rd battle, the marks caused by this battle were compared to the marks caused by the 311th battle. It could already be seen with the naked eye that the marks caused by this battle had decreased. In the 356th battle, the marks caused by the sharp scissors in the hands of an adult had changed back to the marks caused by the key in the hands of a child. In the 383rd battle, the marks of the battle seemed to have become faint. Unless one held a magnifying glass in their hands, it was impossible to see the marks caused by the battle. In the 499th battle, it was now necessary to use nano-level high-precision equipment again. It was just that previously it was to check the extent of the changes in the marks, but this time it was to check whether there were any marks on the surface of the German Third Reich, because the marks caused by Gohan could no longer be seen with the naked eye. However, Gohan seemed to be stuck here. In the next 100 battles, Gohan was unable to improve this result. Gohan felt that there was a thin layer of window paper in front of him. As long as he could pierce through this layer of window paper, Gohan could achieve his goal. But this thin layer of window paper seemed to be like cowhide, and Gohan was unable to pierce through it. Watching the days go by, Gohan's calm temper began to gradually become anxious. Anyone who had failed 600 times in an experiment would have developed this kind of anxiety. Don't tell me that Edison had experimented with more than 10,000 materials to make light bulbs. At that time, Edison was already the rich boss of the General Electric Company. These more than 10,000 experiments were not conducted by Edison alone, but by hundreds of experimenters in more than a dozen laboratories under Edison's command, including the future father of alternating current power transmission, Nikola Tesla. As for Edison himself, at most, he would go around the laboratory once a day, give the hard-working experimenters some cheap encouragement, and then openly claim the experimental results as his own. Of course, from a legal point of view, these experimental results and patents should naturally belong to Edison. After all, Edison was the one who paid these experimenters to do experiments. But Edison shamelessly took all the credit for these results. He didn't mention the names of these poor experimenters in any news report. Even the signatures at the end of the paper didn't give these experimenters, who had worked hard for several years, a chance. It was no wonder that Nikola Tesla left General Electric and became lifelong enemies with Edison. P.S. Edison was actually a very despicable guy. He was far from the king of inventions in the media. In fact, 70% to 80% of the patents he invented in his life were invented by the experimenters under him, and Edison shamelessly took all these titles for himself. Of course, it was undeniable that Edison's invention and scientific research abilities were indeed the best. Just as Gohan was about to be tortured by the 600th failure, another opportunity appeared in front of Gohan. This opportunity did not come from a novel before the apocalypse like the last time, but from the two fellows under Gohan who were the most troublesome, Chinpin and Etion. In fact, this time, Etion was unjustly implicated. After the 599th failure, Gohan decided to take a day off to recover his physical strength. More importantly, he wanted to adjust his mentality and find a way to find the source of the problem. But it was also at this time that Gohan suddenly saw a scene that he did not know how to ridicule. Etion took advantage of the break to drink over 100 bottles of wine. Then, drunk, she fell asleep on the bed. At this time, the gluttonous Chinpin actually took advantage of the opportunity when Gohan was not paying attention to secretly hold the bottles of wine that Etion left on the ground and gulped down a few bottles of wine. His little face instantly became red, and then he began to walk drunkenly. Not only did he walk, but Chinpin also climbed onto Etion's bed unsteadily. Then, he bit Etion's arm. Perhaps he felt that the arm didn't taste good, so he bit Etion's neck. Perhaps he still felt that Etion's neck wasn't easy to bite. In short, Chinpin almost bit Etion's body all over, and in a daze, he finally bit Etion's foot. Good heavens, it directly ate Etion's toe in one bite. Then, in an instant, Chinpin's eyes bulged, and he spat out his foot. He bit Etion twice, and his big cute eyes blurred as he began to cry. While crying, he shouted, "So stinky, so stinky, so disgusting." Chinpin did not think that Etion was the most restless among Gohan's sword maidens. As long as he had free time, he would wander around everywhere, running at least 10 kilometers every day. Of course, his feet were filled with the smell of a beauty. Perhaps because he felt that crying alone was not enough to vent his anger, Chinpin decided to take revenge on Etion. However, no one knew what was in her poor head. She actually stepped on the Heavenly Reliance's pair of towering, mountain-like European pies, and started jumping up and down. Yes, that's right, Chinpin probably treated Etion's opium pies as two springs. He stepped on them and began to jump crazily. Not to mention, the elasticity of these two springs was really not bad. It actually allowed Chinpin to jump 4 or 5 meters high. Even the standing high jump of the Olympic Games might not be able to achieve such a result. Chinpin jumped for dozens of minutes, and the huge movement even alerted Gohan. But when Gohan saw this scene, His attention was not on Qingpin, who deserved a spanking, but on Tian, who was still sleeping soundly under Qingpin's feet. Even if there was the effect of alcohol, ordinary people should have woken up long ago after being tortured like this. How could Tian still sleep so soundly as if nothing had happened? Thinking of this, Gohan did not stop Qingpin's terrible behavior. Instead, he became a focused spectator, carefully watching Qingpin's jump in his head, especially the moment when Qingpin's feet came into contact with Tian's opium pies. Tian's opium pies underwent a wonderful transformation, and at the same time, it produced an upward elasticity, pushing Qingpin's body up again. This was such a wonderful process that Gohan didn't feel tired even after watching it hundreds of times. On the other hand, Qingpin was a little tired from jumping. He was sweating profusely and was ready to give up on taking revenge on Tian. "Wait!" Gohan called out to Qingpin. "Continue jumping. Don't stop unless I tell you to." Things were often like this in the world. The same thing, if you took the initiative to do it, then you would feel that it was very enjoyable. However, if someone forced you to do it, then you would feel that it was the most painful thing in the world. To Qingpin, the current situation was more or less like this. No matter how happy she was jumping on Tian's opium pies, when it became Gohan's mandatory order, Qingpin couldn't be happy no matter what. Although she was still jumping, the expression on her face was as bitter as if her sword wielder had died. If she continued to jump, we didn't doubt that Qingpin would really start crying. Fortunately, after a short while, Gohan suddenly slapped his head and instantly went back into the game. He didn't even have time to bring these sword ladies into the game. However, Gohan didn't need to bring them in, because to Gohan, it was enough to have their sword ladies in the game. After quickly completing all the foreplay, Gohan also saw the Third Reich for the 600th time. However, this time Gohan was already prepared. It was still the same fighting style as before. Gohan's sword attacked the surface of the Third Reich's armor. However, it was different from before. Although Gohan's sword kept colliding with the Third Reich, the surface of the Third Reich's armor didn't even have a trace of damage. Even with nano-level detection equipment, it wasn't able to detect a trace of damage. This was almost impossible because even if an ant crawled across the surface of the Third Reich, nano-level detection equipment would be able to detect traces of the ant's path. However, when Gohan's sword collided with it, nothing was left. Gohan didn't hide his strength. On the contrary, when Gohan attacked, the muscles on his entire arm bulged. It was obvious that he had poured all his strength into the sword in his hand. 1 sword. 2 swords. 3 swords. 9 swords. In a flash, Gohan slashed a total of 9 swords on the Third Reich. If the trajectories of these 9 swords were all connected, then one would be surprised to find that Gohan had drawn a lotus pattern on the surface of the Third Reich. As soon as the lotus was drawn, Gohan fell from the Third Reich as if he had exhausted all his strength. He fell heavily on the ground and didn't even have the strength to move his fingers, let alone get up from the ground. Trash. Is that all you have? You're not even as good as a woman. Hitler's laughter came from the Third Reich through the loudspeakers. At this time, only less than 20 seconds had passed since the start of the battle. In 20 seconds, Gohan fell to the ground like a dead dog. In Hitler's eyes, this guy was indeed not even as good as a woman. Trash. Let the Führer. The Third Reich raised the particle cannon in its hand. As long as the cannon grazed the edge of Gohan's skin, Gohan's body would disintegrate in an instant and turn into a pile of the purest particles in the world. Fire! 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 Hitler kept pressing the firing button in the control room, but there was no response from the Third Reich. Trash. This machine crashed again. Hitler thought that the Third Reich had suddenly crashed. This was not an abnormal thing. No matter how powerful a computer was, it would still crash when it needed to. But it didn't matter if it crashed, as long as it was restarted. Hitler thought so too. When he pressed the restart button, the entire German Third Reich suddenly let out a loud roar. Then, the interior of the German Third Reich seemed to have lost all support. It collapsed to the ground like an inverted pyramid, completely turning into a pile of waste. This move, I'll call you Chaos Golden Lotus. Gohan, who was lying on the ground, looked at the scene in front of him with satisfaction and gave the fourth move of Chaos Swordsmanship such a name. Chapter 947. Chaotic Golden Lotus was the fourth move in the Chaos Sword technique that Gohan had created. It was also the most insidious move in the Chaos Sword technique. It was a move that Gohan had created by combining the hidden force recorded in the novel from before the apocalypse, as well as the soft force that Gohan had comprehended from watching Qingpin jumping around the heavens Europa sect. When this chaotic Golden Lotus was practiced to the highest level, even if one used all their strength to slash at the opponent's body, not a single hair on the opponent's skin would be harmed. However, in reality, the force that was like a golden lotus would penetrate the opponent's skin and enter the opponent's body. On the surface, it would look fine, but the force had already entered the opponent's body. One could imagine how terrifying it would be once a powerful force entered one's internal organs. Even if one had the defensive ability of the World Emperor alloy, once this sharp force entered one's body, there was no doubt that only death awaited them. This was why the marks that Gohan left on the surface of the German Third Reich were getting shallower and shallower. As the marks got shallower and shallower, more and more sword chi entered the opponent's body. When there were no longer any marks left on the surface of the body, as if it had not been touched at all, it meant that all of the sword chi had entered the opponent's body. At the same time, the damage of the chaotic Golden Lotus was stacked with the NTH power. For example, if the chaotic Golden Lotus was used continuously, the first strike could cause 100 points of damage in the opponent's body, then the second strike could cause 200 points of damage, and the third strike could cause 400 points of damage. When Gohan had killed Hitler, he had stacked 9 strikes, which was equivalent to causing 200,000 points of damage in the interior of the German Third Reich. Gohan had deliberately vented this damage on the German Third Reich's power core. This attack had directly caused the power core of the German Third Reich to explode, instantly destroying the internal parts of the German Third Reich. However, this also proved how terrifying the defense of the German Third Reich's armor was. Even if there was an explosion inside the Third Reich, its external armor was still intact. It was like a firecracker. You ignited the gunpowder hidden inside the firecracker, but the circle of red paper wrapped around the firecracker did not move at all. In a sense, it was indeed a squib. However, 9 strikes wasn't the limit of the Chaos Golden Lotus. In theory, the Chaos Golden Lotus could stack countless strikes. In fact, when Gohan could stack up to 20 strikes, the 20th strike would be able to deal 1,048,57600 damage, which was more than 100 million damage. Moreover, this was only the damage Gohan dealt when he didn't use Sword Essence. Once Gohan used Sword Essence in tandem with Sword Essence and activated his Sword Energy, the damage he dealt would be at least tenfold, reaching a frightening 1 billion damage. This was not an injury that any existence could withstand. Even if it was an expert whose ability surpassed an Emperor Sword-level sword wielder, when his body suffered such a strong injury, he would probably die immediately. There would definitely be no accident. However, whether Gohan could successfully use the 10th strike was also a big question mark, let alone the 20th strike. Just like the terrifying stacking damage of the Chaos Golden Lotus, the Chaos Golden Lotus required a similarly terrifying amount of stamina and energy. For example, after Gohan used the Chaos Golden Lotus 9 strikes, he could only lie on the ground like a dead dog. This was because Gohan had exhausted all of his stamina and energy. For Gohan, if he wanted to break through the limit of the Chaos Golden Lotus 9 strikes and use the 10th strike, he would have to at least wait for Gohan to synchronize with a Spirit Sword-level sword lady. If this video of the battle were to be released, the whole world would probably go crazy over Guhan's results again. A famed sword-level sword wielder could actually defeat the Third German Reich, which was equivalent to a fairy sword-level sword wielder, without using sword element. If Guhan used sword element, wouldn't he be able to go against the natural order and directly defeat an emperor sword-level sword wielder? Needless to say, the crown of the number one sword wielder in history would pass from Kanzu's head to Guhan's head. Guhan would also officially become the number one sword wielder. However, Guhan knew in his heart that this was pure bullsh*t. Even though Guhan had indeed defeated the U-level Yuan Ko Nazi King Hitler, this did not mean that Guhan truly had the ability to defeat the U-level Yuan Ko. On the contrary, this was completely due to Guhan's luck. First of all, Guhan's opponent was the Nazi King Hitler, a special U-level Yuan Ko. Hitler was probably the one with the highest attack and defense among all the U-level Yuan Ko. However, the Third German Reich's agility was really terrible. No matter how strong the Third German Reich's attack was, it could not defeat the agile Guhan. At the same time, the Third German Reich's weakness was very obvious. Its power core itself was too weak. Usually, the power core was very safe under the protection of the hard external armor, so it could not become the Third German Reich's weakness. However, when the Third German Reich's proud defense was no longer there, this fatal weakness was completely exposed. Otherwise, how could a mere 200,000 damage kill the U-level Yuan Ko with tens of millions of HP? In fact, Hitler had basically died from his own suicide. This was very similar to his original ending. Another important point was that Hitler had severely underestimated his enemy. Every U-level Yuan Ko had the ability to enter the void. Although the Third German Reich didn't have the ability to enter the void, the problem was that Hitler himself could. As long as Hitler himself hid in the void the moment the Third German Reich exploded, he would be able to escape unscathed. After a while, the Third German Reich would automatically repair itself, and Hitler would be a good man again. Unfortunately, Hitler didn't expect that a human who couldn't even leave a mark on the Third German Reich's armor could actually detonate the Third German Reich's power core. Hitler didn't know that the power core of the Third German Reich had exploded until the moment he died. Hitler died without knowing why. Therefore, when Guhan encountered other U-level Yuan Ko, it was still unrealistic to defeat the opponent without using sword essence. First of all, 200,000 damage couldn't cause fatal damage to most U-level Yuan Ko. Not every U-level Yuan Ko was like Hitler and had a power core that could kill him. More importantly, the opponent only needed to hide in the void. Then, before Guhan also had the ability to enter the void, Guhan couldn't do anything to these U-level Yuan Ko. In summary, Guhan didn't plan to announce his achievements. Otherwise, if other people suggested that Guhan kill another U-level Yuan Ko and Guhan couldn't, it would be very embarrassing. For Guhan, being able to create the fourth move of the Chaos Sword Art, Chaos Golden Lotus, was Guhan's biggest reward. This meant that Guhan was one step closer to the peak of sword art. However, what Guhan didn't expect was that after Guhan killed Hitler, the system suddenly sent a series of notifications. System notification: you have killed the Nazi King Hitler and activated the King Arthur's Betrayal Dungeon's hidden Easter egg. You have successfully activated the hidden 12 skyscraping temples dungeon. System notification: the hidden Easter egg has been activated. King Arthur's Betrayal Dungeon is about to close. Please leave the dungeon or be forcefully kicked out after 30 seconds. System notification: the hidden Easter egg has been activated. King Arthur's Betrayal Dungeon will forever seal player military governor. Player military governor can no longer enter King Arthur's Betrayal Dungeon. Just as the system prompt stated, when Guhan left the instance dungeon and opened up the instance dungeon tree to search for King Arthur's Betrayal again, he discovered that the instance dungeon's name had disappeared from its original position. In its place was a dungeon called 12 Skyscraping Temples. What a pity! I won't be able to see Artoria again. Seeing that, Gohan could not help but feel regret. As such, before the next instant's dungeon related to Artoria was opened, Gohan would forever lose the chance to see Artoria again. In the entire game world's 200 years, only one instance dungeon related to Artoria had been opened. Who knew when the next instance dungeon would open? 10 years? 20 years? Or 120 years? Or could it be 1,200 years? Well, the happiness in the game was only temporary and illusory. Gohan's ultimate goal was to find traces of Artoria in the real world. According to the various clues, Artoria should be trapped in a desperate situation, waiting for Gohan's rescue. However, as the saying goes, what you lose on the swings, you gain on the mulberry. When the King Arthur's Betrayal dungeon closed to Gohan, a brand new 12 Skyscraping Temples dungeon appeared before Gohan. What kind of dungeon was this hidden dungeon? The hidden dungeon in Sword Maiden Online had always had one meaning, and that was similar to the King Arthur's Betrayal dungeon. After the dungeon was cleared for the first time, the entire dungeon would be opened to all players. However, such a hidden dungeon would usually only appear in July or August of the second year. It was only February now, and the timing did not match up at all. Gina-chan, what does this dungeon mean? If there was anything in the game that he did not understand, he could ask Tomono Kakashi. Therefore, Gohan directly contacted Tomono Kakashi and told Tomono Kakashi everything that he had encountered. What? You killed the universe-level Yuan-ko with the ability of a famed sword-level player? You scared me to death, Tomono Kakashi said as she patted her small chest. However, she did not look that surprised. This was because Tomono Kakashi did not know that Gohan had killed the universe-level Yuan-ko without using sword essence. Otherwise, Tomono Kakashi's artificial intelligence core might have a logical breakdown. That's not the point. The point is this 12 Skyscraping Temples dungeon. What is going on with this dungeon? Can I go in? Gohan straightforwardly asked the question in his heart. 12 Skyscraping Temples? Isn't this an abandoned dungeon? Tomono Kakashi said in shock. Chapter 948. The 12 Heavenly Temples was probably the most memorable abandoned dungeon in Tomono Kakashi's memory. The so-called abandoned instance dungeons were those that had already been designed and completed, but in the end, they were abandoned by the developers. There were many such abandoned dungeons in Sword Maiden Online. It was said that 108 dungeons were designed and created when the game was first launched. However, only 98 of them were used while the remaining 10 were abandoned. Apart from that, the game would add a new dungeon every year. Of course, these dungeons were created after thorough discussions and confirmed that there were no problems. However, there were always some special circumstances that happened in the past 200 years. As a result, these dungeons had to be abandoned after they were completed and would never appear in front of the players again. There were many reasons for this. Some of them were because the dungeon story was found to be inconsistent with reality and was forced to be abandoned. Some of them were because the plot of the dungeon caused dissatisfaction with the family members of the characters involved in the dungeon and was forced to be abandoned. There were also problems with the difficulty of the dungeon that made it difficult for the players to complete the dungeon and was forced to be abandoned. However, the most common reason was that the dungeon could not pass the review of the Sword Committee after it was created. The 12 Heavenly Palaces was such an instance dungeon. In fact, the 12 Heavenly Palaces was one of the oldest instance dungeons in Sword Maiden Online. It was one of the 10 instance dungeons that were abandoned when Sword Maiden Online was first launched. It was said that some beta players were lucky enough to play this instance dungeon. In the game's official website, there was also information about the 12 Heavenly Palaces. However, when the game started its open beta, The dungeon was completely removed. Later on, there was some news that the dungeon did not pass the review of the Sword Committee. As for the reason, no one could figure it out because the Sword Committee was too lazy to explain such things. Therefore, when Tomono Kakaze heard that Gohan had unlocked the 12 Heavenly Temples dungeon, her childish face instantly turned sour. She did not even bother to say another word to Gohan. She closed her eyes and began to search for the dungeon. The search went on for a full hour. Finally, he opened his eyes helplessly and said to Gohan, "Don't enter this dungeon for now. I have to report this dungeon to the Research Institute and let them deal with this problem. I suspect that it's very likely that the Research Institute will directly close this dungeon from the back end. If you're in the dungeon at that time, it'll become very troublesome. Your consciousness may even be trapped in this dungeon forever. So, before I give you accurate information, you are absolutely not allowed to enter this dungeon. Could this dungeon be a backup plan left behind by the heaven-shrouding Sword Emperor?" Based on his previous encounter, Gohan instinctively guessed that this was also something left behind by the heaven-shrouding Sword Emperor. Impossible. This isn't some minor modification of the dungeon's data. It directly created a new dungeon on top of your sub-dungeon tree. This requires a very high level of authority. Even I don't have that kind of authority. The backup plan that Zhetian Jiendi left behind would definitely not be able to do this. After saying that, Tomono Kakaze hurriedly disappeared from Gohan's sight. She was probably going to report the situation to the Research Institute. With Tomono Kakaze's warning, Gohan did not dare to enter the 12 Heavenly Temples dungeon again. Instead, he immediately logged out of the game and began to search for information related to the 12 Heavenly Temples in the History Forum. In fact, Gohan had a slight understanding of the 12 Heavenly Temples. The so-called 12 Heavenly Temples was actually a test that Kinzu had left behind for the future generations. It was said that when Kinzu was 50 years old, he suddenly felt that he was getting old. At the same time, his biological son was only 2 or 3 years old. If anything happened to him, his abilities might not be able to continue. Therefore, Kinzu announced to all humans that he would build 12 palaces on a mountain outside of New Yenjing City called the Skyscraper Cliff. These 12 palaces would be set up with different tests. Sword bearers below the level of an immortal sword would not participate in this test. If anyone could successfully pass all the tests of the 12 palaces, they would be able to become Kinzu's disciple and become Kinzu's personal disciple. Becoming the personal disciple of the most powerful Kinzu in the world was naturally the dream of countless people. In a short period of 7 or 8 years, tens of thousands of people participated in the 12 Heavenly Temples test. However, among these tens of thousands of people, not a single one of them had passed all 12 palaces. Later on, Kinzu actually took back the 12 Heavenly Temples and announced to the public that he would not accept any more disciples. This matter, which had caused all the sword bearers to flock to, slowly died down and gradually became a small story in street literature. Perhaps many people in this world knew the name of the 12 Heavenly Temples. However, very few people knew what the tests of the 12 Heavenly Temples were. After exiting the game, Gohan flipped through the books for a full 4 hours. However, all of the information was about the story of the 12 skyscraping palaces. There wasn't a single written record of the trials of the 12 skyscraping palaces. At that time, tens of thousands of people had participated in the 12 Heavenly Temples test. Among these tens of thousands of people, there should have been at least a few thousand people who had recorded the stories. This was something that could not be hidden. At the same time, this had happened after the apocalypse. Therefore, it could not have been included in the list of destruction after the cultural apocalypse. Therefore, it was clear that the information about the 12 Heavenly Temples had been deliberately blocked by the Sword Committee. However, this did not matter. The Sword Committee's blockade was not difficult for Gohan. In the past, Gohan had a hacker friend that he could borrow. Now, for Gohan, this was just a matter of communication. Therefore, Gohan immediately called Lu Shihua. After a few seconds, Lu Shihua's voice, which he had not heard for a long time, rang in Gohan's ears. Teacher! As soon as he heard Lu Shihua's voice, Gohan acutely felt that something was wrong. Lu Shihua's personality was very calm, like a reliable big sister. However, Lu Shihua's voice was very melodious, like a yellow oriole. At this moment, Lu Shihua's voice was very low. Clearly, this was not a change in the vocal cords, but a change in Lu Shihua's mood. Lu Shihua seemed to be in a very low mood, so even his voice was low. Shihua? What happened in Yuzhong City? Gohan asked in surprise. Grand Great Master! Grand Great Master, he... Lu Shihua's voice was intermittent, and his voice was filled with a sobbing tone. Coupled with the mention of the words Grand Great Master, no matter how stupid Gohan was, he still reacted. It was likely that his cheap master Lu Lei had encountered a huge problem. Don't cry. You are the Sword Pavilion Master. You must not cry. Gohan used a firm voice to help Lu Shihua stabilize his emotions. Then, he calmly guided him. Tell me, how is my teacher now? Could it be that he... No. Grandmaster is still alive, but Grandmaster, he... Lu Shihua choked for a long time. But Grandmaster can't make it. The doctor said that Grandmaster can only hold on for a few more days at most. He's going to, how could this be? Before I left, teacher told me that he could hold on for another year or two. Gohan's voice instantly grew louder. It was clear that Gohan, who had just been helping Lu Shihua stabilize his emotions, had become a little unstable himself. However, when Lu Shihua heard that his master was about to explode, he calmed down and began to comfort his master softly. Yesterday, 2U Class Yuan Ko appeared in our Yuzhong City's safe zone. They surrounded 2 spirit sword rank swordsmen, dozens of famed sword rank swordsmen, and hundreds of ancient sword rank swordsmen. Ancestral Grandpa immediately rushed over to help. Although he succeeded in rescuing the trapped sword bearers, he was unable to do so. However, Ancestral Master was also injured by 2 universe-level Yuan Ko when he was fighting with Yuan Ko. After returning, Ancestral Grandpa continuously coughed up blood for the entire night. In the morning, the doctor said that Ancestral Grandpa's purple palace had already dried up. It was just that Ancestral Grandpa had been forcefully holding on until now. However, the battle yesterday completely injured Ancestral Grandpa's purple palace. The sword marks in his purple palace have already begun to disperse. At most, in 2 or 3 days, all the sword marks will disappear. Lu Shihua couldn't continue speaking. However, Gohan now completely understood Lu Lei's situation. The sword marks in a sword-bearer's purple palace would disappear due to many reasons. For example, self-diagnosis, or if it was forcefully dispersed by Yuan Ko. However, these situations weren't enough to kill the sword-bearer. At most, the sword-bearer would become an ordinary person, and their life wouldn't be affected. However, once the sword marks of the sword-bearer began to disperse, it meant that the sword-bearer had reached the end of his lifespan. The sword-bearer was about to die of old age. With the development of modern medicine, there were no diseases that modern medicine couldn't cure. Only the natural death of old age due to the end of one's lifespan was something that modern medicine couldn't cure no matter what. When an ordinary person died of old age, they would just close their eyes and collapse their leg. There wouldn't be any signs before this. However, the death of a sword-bearer was different. Before the sword-bearer died of old age, the sword marks in his purple palace would involuntarily and uncontrollably disperse. At the same time, all of the sword-bearers would enter a state of deep sleep. When the sword marks in the purple palace completely dispersed, the sword-bearer would die along with the sword-bearer. The sword-bearers would also completely lose their bond with the sword-bearer and return to the sword pavilion to wait for their next sword-bearer. It was obvious that Lu Lei had entered this state. Just like what the doctor said, in at most 2 or 3 days, Lu Lei would leave this world forever. Chapter 949. Xihua, where are you now? Are you by Master's side? After a long silence, Gohan finally spoke. I'm not, Lu Xihua replied in a small voice. What? Are you still my Gohan's disciple? Are you Master's disciple? Why aren't you by Master's side at such an important moment? Where are you now? Gohan's voice was filled with anger. At that moment Gohan felt extremely guilty. Because he was in Shanhai Pass, Gohan couldn't return to Lu Lei's side. Lu Xihua, his disciple, naturally became Gohan's hope. Gohan hoped that when he wasn't by Lu Lei's side, his disciple could take his place and stay by his master's side. It's not that I don't want to be by Grandmaster's side, it's just that some people. Lu Xihua didn't continue, but Gohan could guess what Lu Xihua wanted to say. Yuzhong City's emperor sword aristocratic families saw that Lu Lei was about to die and that Lu Xihua was only an ancient sword wielder. Therefore, they started to trip Lu Xihua up. They used all sorts of methods to stop Lu Xihua from entering the ward, not giving Lu Xihua a chance to see Lu Lei. Xihua, take your sword, lady, and rush into the hospital. If anyone dares to stop you, use your status as Sword Pavilion Master to ban them from entering Sword Pavilion for the rest of their lives. I want to see who dares to play around with their future, Gohan said to Lu Xihua. But Master, will this? Lu Xihua was still worried. It's not like it will or won't. This is a critical time. If you don't show some of the spirit of a Sword Pavilion Master, they will think that you are a pushover. Who knows how they will bully you in the future? Then there are some seniors. They are blocking the door of my martial ancestors' ward. Lu Xihua said awkwardly again. The seniors she was referring to were naturally the elders from the Emperor's sword family who had stopped Gohan from making the decision to become the Sword Pavilion Master. I have my ways to deal with those people. Listen to me. After Gohan explained how to deal with those old men, he hesitated for a moment before continuing. By the way, after this is over, don't always stay in Yuzhong City. Go out to accept more tasks and accumulate sword essence. Strength is the way to go. The sooner you become Jiendi, the sooner these people will kneel at your feet, understand? Yes, Master. Lu Xihua nodded. Then, she followed Gohan's instructions and rushed into the hospital where Lu Lei was. At the entrance of the hospital stood a row of sword-wielding men. These sword-wielding men did not say anything when they saw Lu Xihua appear. They just stood in front of Lu Xihua and formed a human wall. These sword-wielding men were all artifact sword-level sword-wielding men. It was a piece of cake for them to work together to block an ancient sword-level sword-wielder. The few of you listen up. I will count to 3. If any of you don't move aside, I guarantee that you will never be able to enter the Sword Pavilion ever again, Lu Xihua said coldly. The sword-wielding men in front of her were stunned when they heard this. After looking at each other for a while, one of the sword-wielding men suddenly bent down to tie his shoelaces. Lu Xihua took this opportunity to jump into the hospital. The rest of the artifact sword-level sword-wielding men no longer dared to block Lu Xihua. Sure, family head. It seems that the little fellows below you are not brave enough. They actually couldn't block a little kid. Beside the Sure family head, Sure Patian, who had once opposed Gohan, an old man of similar status laughed and said, Didn't those fellows in your family also move aside? The Sure family head glanced at the old man, and then calmly said, The little fellows still need to improve, so it's reasonable that they are not infected. However, us old fellows have to show our true colors. This old man is only like this for the rest of my life. Do you still expect me to become a spirit sword-level sword wielder? The other old man smiled and didn't say anything. Sure Patian was indeed right. These old fellows had been stuck in the position of famous sword-level sword-wielding for most of their lives. They had already accumulated more than hundreds of thousands of quarks of sword element. They had tested all the sword ladies of spirit sword level, but they still couldn't find a sword lady that could synchronize with them. Obviously, they would only be famous sword-level sword-wielding men for the rest of their lives. There was no possibility for them to go further. In this way, they would not have any desire for the sword pavilion. They would not be afraid of Lu Shihua's threat. Seniors. Lu Shihua walked to the front of these family heads and respectfully bowed. Through Lu Shihua's red and swollen eyelids, as well as the tear stains that were still imprinted on his face, even a fool could see that Lu Shihua had cried a lot just now. Can you let Grand Disciple go in and say a few words to Grand Master? Unfortunately, these family heads were all people with hearts of stone. How could their hearts soften because of a few drops of tears from Lu Shihua? Shirpatian, who had already fallen out with Gohan, simply put on a sour face and looked at Lu Shihua. You're not allowed to go in. Chairman didn't say that he wanted to see you, so you're not qualified to go in. Seniors, please be magnanimous. This time, Shihua owes you a favor. Please rest assured and slide in. Lu Shihua bowed again and said. However, these family heads still did not have any reaction, as if Lu Shihua did not exist. Everyone, please make way. This was a voice that was completely different from Lu Shihua's voice. This voice sounded very hollow, as if it was an illusory voice that came from the void. Shirpatian and the others couldn't help but raise their heads, and saw an angel holding a long sword in his hand and a pair of white wings on his back looking at them. Not good. Yuan Ko broke in. An old man screamed. He instinctively thought that this angel was a Yuan Ko. Then, he instantly summoned his sword Maiden and prepared to attack this angel. Wait! Shirpatian hurriedly stopped this old man, because at this time, Shirpatian had already discovered that this angel in front of him was not a Yuan Ko, but a genuine sword maiden. You go in. Shirpatian suddenly sighed, then moved his body to the side, giving way to the door to enter the ward. Old man Shir, what are you doing? The old man next to him asked in confusion, but Shirpatian directly gave him a warning look. The old man didn't say anything else and shut his mouth. Thank you, seniors. Lu Shihua bowed for the third time, then prepared to enter the ward with this angel. Lu Shihua, right? Shirpatian suddenly said in a deep voice. Everything that we have done before is our fault. I hope that we can stop here, and from now on, our previous grievances will be written off. What do you think? Lu Shihua stood in place for a long time before replying word by word. It's not whether Shihua is willing to write it off with all of you, but whether Shihua's master is willing to write it off with all of you. I am very sorry, but I cannot give you an answer. After saying this, Lu Shihua directly entered the ward, and then with a bang closed the door. Old man Shir, what is going on with you? Why did your tone suddenly change? Seeing Lu Shihua enter the ward, the old man immediately asked with dissatisfaction. Old man, where have you been for the past few decades? Do you still not recognize the sword mistress with a pair of wings on her back? Shirpatian scolded, then left the hospital without looking back. Could it be that it is the double-winged angel sword? The old man finally reacted, and his face instantly looked like a crying cucumber. As long as the sword mistress with the double-winged angel sword did not die, she would be destined to become an Emperor sword mistress. In other words, from this moment onwards, he and his family had already offended a future Jiandi. Only God knew how this Lu Shihua would take revenge on him when he grew up. Damn, this little bastard is really cunning. It has been a few months, and yet he has hidden his sword mistress so well. Otherwise, who would have the time to provoke her? The old man said, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Grand Master Grandpa, I am unfilial to only come to see you now. Once he entered the ward, Lu Shihua kneeled in front of Lu Lei's bed, and said in a tearful voice, Good child. You must have put in a lot of effort to come in. Lu Lei slowly turned his head, looked at the Grand Disciple kneeling in front of him, and spoke in an extremely weak yet gentle voice. Crying devil, shame on your face! Gohan, shame on your face! Qingpin stuck out her tongue at him. Disciple, you must remember, as an emperor, you must protect the country and the people, that's all. As soon as the voice fell, the sword mark in Lu Lei's purple palace disappeared without a trace. This legendary old man had been protected by Yuzhong City for half his life, and he had also protected Yuzhong City for half his life. The great sword immortal of the Nine Heavens passed away on March 7, 3009, at the age of 91. Chapter 950. That night, Gohan received a report from the Sword Committee Association to the 8 base cities and Shanhaiguan. The protector of Yuzhong City, the leader of the Sword Bearers, and the chairman of the Yuzhong Sword Committee, Cloudy Sword Immortal Lu Lei, had passed away due to his severe injuries. To express their condolences to Lu Lei, the Sword Committee Association announced at the same time. The 8 base cities collectively mourned for 3 days. Flags would be flown at half-mast for 3 days, all activities would be stopped for 3 days, and no red, yellow, or purple colors were allowed for 3 days. These were the honors that Sword Immortal level sword bearers had after their death. Every time a human Sword Immortal level sword bearer passed away, the 8 base cities would have the same event. Just like a few months ago, after Sword Immortal Tian Hen of Yanjing City had died in battle against the run-level Yuan bandit, the humans had also held a similar mourning event. This was not a rare occurrence. However, in reality, something very strange had happened to Lu Lei's death. Sword Maiden Online announced on its official website that to express its condolences to Lu Lei, the entire Sword Maiden Online would shut down its servers for 3 days starting from midnight the next day. This was something that rarely happened in the history of Sword Maiden Online. Because it was claimed that there would never be a bug, Sword Maiden Online had never shut down its servers for system maintenance. Sword Maiden Online servers would only be shut down for 10 days when an Emperor Sword Immortal level sword bearer passed away to express its condolences to Jiandi. However, this was only out of respect for Jiandi. Sword Maiden Online had never shut down its servers for 3 days for any Sword Immortal level sword bearer. This was the first time in history that something like this had happened, and it made all the players very curious. At the same time, they wanted to find out what kind of earth-shattering things Lu Lei had done, so much so that Sword Maiden Online would shut down its servers for 3 days for the first time. Although Sword Immortal level sword bearers were the absolute higher-ups among humans, at least 60% of humans did not know who Lu Lei was. About 80% of them only knew that Lu Lei was the chairman of Yuzhong City's Sword Committee, but they knew nothing about Lu Lei's achievements. Even the common people of Yuzhong City didn't know about these things. It was a very normal thing. Just like before the Great Calamity, many people in Huaxia might have known who the president of Huaxia was, but how many people knew who was on the 7-member standing committee of the highest authority in Huaxia? Therefore, after looking it up, these humans found out about Lu Lei's great past. They knew about Lu Lei's bloody battle at Jiyu Gate, sending orphans thousands of miles away, and fighting against the 4 universe-level masters, Yuan Ko, and so on. This allowed many people who knew nothing about Lu Lei to understand him. At the same time, they were filled with respect for him. Many people even lit candles to send Lu Lei off. Lu Lei's fame among the humans increased by several folds. These were things that Lu Lei couldn't do when he was alive, but he did it after he died because of a small game. Even though this was something worth celebrating, it was still so sad to think about it. Ordinary people might really think that Sword Maiden Online was just to mourn, but in fact, Gohan knew better than anyone else. How could Sword Maiden Online break the convention and stop the server for a sword wielder of Immortal Sword tier? Obviously, this was just an excuse. The real reason was that there was a bug in Sword Maiden Online that could only be resolved by stopping the server. This bug was probably the 12 skyscraping temples dungeon that he had triggered. Since he had to stop the server for 3 days, there was no need for Gohan to hide in the Guardian's mansion anymore. For the first time in 3 months, Gohan took the initiative to leave the Shi-Sing garrison. He circled around his own *T* garrison and secretly observed the 18 ancient sword-wielder that belonged to him. He couldn't help but frown. Some of these ancient sword-wielder were sleeping, some were surfing the internet, and some were playing football in 2 teams. In fact, this wasn't anything out of the ordinary. It was completely normal entertainment, but it was this normal entertainment that was unforgivable in the eyes of the depressed Gohan. So, Gohan used his authority as the Guardian to gather all the ancient sword-wielder in front of him. "Where are the white flowers on you?" Seeing these ancient sword-rank sword-bearers gathered together, Gohan asked with a harsh and cruel expression. These ancient sword-rank sword-bearers could not help but shudder. All right, let's go. Let's go. Who has nothing better to do than to wear white flowers? A few ancient sword-wielders subconsciously said what was on their minds, but they immediately covered their mouths with their palms. Because at this time, these ancient sword-wielder realized that Gohan was wearing a white robe. He had a white ribbon tied around his head, white rings around his wrists, and a white paper flower on his chest. This was not how a normal person would dress. No matter how they looked at it, it looked like their boss was wearing morning clothes. Today, a great sword-wielder passed away. Have you all forgotten the customs of the sword-wielder? There was a custom among the sword-wielder. When an immortal sword-wielder passed away, all the sword-wielder had to wear a white flower on their chest for 3 days as a sign of mourning. But this was only a custom, not a rule. Therefore, most of the sword-bearers of Yuzhong City would wear this white flower, but the sword-bearers of other cities would not be so lucky. He had not received any benefits from Yuzhong City, so why should he wear a white flower for the sword-bearers of Yuzhong City who were at the immortal sword tier? When they reached a place like Shanghai Pass, there were even fewer people who would follow this custom. After all, this was a precarious place. If they were not careful, they might die here the next day. They might wear white flowers for others, but who would wear white flowers for themselves? So the sword-wielder in Shanghai Pass was probably the most disdainful of this custom. In the entire Shanghai Pass, there were probably no more than 100 sword-wielder who wore white flowers for Lu Lei. Hearing Gohan's question, these ancient sword-wielder finally understood why their boss was so angry. But they didn't care. If you wanted to be filial, that was your business. What did it have to do with them? The emotions in their hearts were reflected on their faces, and these sword-wielders' expressions were more or less filled with disdain. You can't be taught. Gohan's long sword pointed angrily at the ground, and then hundreds of thousands of sword auras burst out from the feet of these ancient sword-wielder. They shot up into the sky like a geyser, and then landed on the ground and exploded into a cloud of smoke. These ancient sword-wielder were scared out of their wits. If they had not controlled the sword auras well, they would have lost an arm or a leg. Our boss is definitely a madman. I definitely don't want to work under this madman. These ancient sword-wielder all had the same thought. They wanted to immediately go to Baihu Guardian's mansion and use their contribution points to apply for a change of position. But on the surface, none of them dared to show such thoughts. They could only stand in front of Gohan even more respectfully, looking like obedient children. Sorry. Did I scare you guys? Gohan suddenly sighed and then said to these ancient sword-wielder who were scared out of their wits, Sword Immortal Cloudy Sky is my master, so I can't help but be a little emotional. So that's how it is, so our boss is the disciple of an immortal sword-wielder. The sword-wielder came to a sudden realization, and at the same time, a little bit of respect for Gohan emerged in their hearts. To be able to grieve so much for his master, it seemed that their boss was a righteous and compassionate person. But soon, these ancient sword-wielder expressed that they had to take back their word. This was because not only was Gohan a righteous and compassionate person, he was also a demon who liked to torture people. This was because Gohan told them that in order to express their condolences for Sword Immortal Cloudy Sky, he hoped that everyone present would draw a picture to express their grief for Sword Immortal Cloudy Sky. Hearing the word draw, these sword wielder were already screaming in their hearts. These people were old and young, and they were very good at fighting. But when had they ever drawn a picture? In their entire lives, they had never even picked up a brush. Forget it. I'll just make a few random mistakes and be done with it, these ancient sword wielder thought to themselves. These ancient sword wielders thought to themselves. Then, just as they were about to scribble something on paper, Gohan suddenly pulled out a cigarette. Jiu Yuechen. Gohan pulled out a yellow-haired ancient sword wielder who was standing at the very front of the group. This was the youngest of the ancient sword wielder, only 19 years old. But even though he was only 19, he was still half a year older than Gohan. I walked around just now and found you hiding in the bushes smoking. I think you must be a good smoker, Gohan said with a smile. Haha, what's wrong, boss? The rules don't say that I can't smoke, Jiu Yuechen said with a bitter expression. He thought that Gohan was looking for an excuse to teach him a lesson. I didn't say that you smoke too much. Gohan directly stuffed the cigarette into Jiu Yuechen's mouth. Then, with a flash of the Juzi sword in his hand, the cigarette was instantly lit. Hoo! Jiu Yuechen couldn't help but take a deep breath, letting the thick smell of tobacco fill his throat and lungs. He exhaled through his nose, and his nerves were instantly filled with satisfaction. It was as if he had just had a good time. Boss, your cigarette is too good. Where did you buy it? I'll go buy a pack and smoke too. Jiu Yuechen seemed to have forgotten how scary Gohan was in front of him. He wanted to get close to Gohan, wanting to know where he could buy the cigarette. Unfortunately, he didn't know that the cigarettes were specially supplied by the chairman of the Yuzhang Sword Pavilion. Lu Lei didn't smoke, so he gave all the cigarettes he had accumulated over the past few decades to Gohan. Gohan naturally didn't smoke either, so it meant that the cigarettes were given to the brat Jiu Yuechen for free. Don't worry. I guarantee that you'll hate the smell very soon, Gohan said with a smile. No way. That's impossible. I can't get enough of this thing in my life. How could I hate it? Jiu Yuechen said happily, not taking Gohan's words seriously. That's good. Now take another puff and exhale it. Although Jiu Yuechen didn't know why Gohan wanted him to do this, smoking wasn't a painful thing. Therefore, Jiu Yuechen obediently followed Gohan's words. When the smoke came out of Jiu Yuechen's nose, Gohan suddenly pulled out his sword and aimed at Jiu Yuechen's face like a kaleidoscope. The sword light was so close to Jiu Yuechen's face that Jiu Yuechen felt that Gohan's sword was dancing on the tip of his nose. He was so scared that his legs went soft, and he knelt on the ground on the spot. Learn the sword technique I used just now and draw this painting. Hearing Gohan's words, Jiu Yuechen, who was sweating profusely, raised his head in confusion. He saw that the smoke that came out of his nose had turned into an ink portrait of a person floating in the air. The portrait of this person was naturally the deceased Cloudy Sword Immortal Lu Lei. Chapter 951. These were probably the most painful 3 days that these ancient sword-rank swordbearers had ever experienced. During these 3 days, these ancient sword-rank swordbearers were forced by Gohan to practice the 9 firmament sword technique. Of course, this was just the name that Gohan had given to this sword technique. The ancient sword-rank swordbearers secretly called this sword technique the Rune Ghost sword technique. According to the requirements of the freezing cold, these sword-bearers had to use their swords to draw a portrait of Lu Lei before the smoke dissipated. Even if these sword-bearers were given a piece of paper and a brush, without 10 days of hard work, these sword-bearers would not be able to draw Lu Lei's appearance, let alone make a portrait of some smoke drifting in the wind. However, Gohan did not give up until he achieved his goal. He had even sealed off the entire garrison residence. Without Gohan's permission, these ancient sword-rank sword-bearers would not be able to leave the Shi Sing garrison. Helpless, these unlucky sword-bearers could only draw at the smoke over and over again. At the same time, they imagined Lu Lei's face in their minds. Even if they added up the amount of time they had missed their parents, they would not have missed Lu Lei more. However, Gohan did not just let them try it out on their own. In fact, in these 3 days, Gohan had subtly become the teacher of these 17 ancient sword-rank sword-bearers. Gohan would personally teach these ancient sword-rank sword-bearers how to hold the sword, how to draw the sword, and various other sword techniques. After 3 days, although these ancient sword-rank sword-bearers could not draw a portrait of Lu Lei as realistically as Gohan, they had no problem drawing a portrait of a person's head. Some of the more talented sword-bearers could even draw a nose and eyes. This meant that their swordsmanship had reached a whole new level. If there was anyone who was worse off than these ancient sword-rank sword-bearers, it was probably Jiyu Yuechen. This was because Jiyu Yuechen was the person that Gohan had personally chosen not to draw. However, he had a more important task, which was to be responsible for the smoke that the other 17 sword-bearers needed to draw with. In these 3 days, Jiyu Yuechen did not do anything else but chain smoke continuously. He would then blow out the smoke and use it as a drawing board for the other ancient sword-rank sword-bearers. At the beginning, Jiyu Yuechen was quite happy. To be able to continuously smoke such delicious cigarettes was a wonderful thing. However, Jiyu Yuechen soon discovered that this was not a wonderful thing at all. The cigarette smell that Jiyu Yuechen loved so much now tasted like bitter gourd. At the same time, Jiyu Yuechen's throat began to itch, and his lungs felt uncomfortable. His entire body felt like it was covered in smoke. In just half a day, Jiyu Yuechen found Gohan and begged for mercy. He said that he would rather practice painting than smoke. Unfortunately, Gohan did not care about Jiyu Yuechen's request. Under Gohan's coercion, Jiyu Yuechen was responsible for supplying all the smoke for the next 3 days. This was probably the worst day of Jiyu Yuechen's life. Jiyu Yuechen had never felt that the smell of cigarettes was so horrible and disgusting. Jiyu Yuechen swore to the heavens that he would never touch a cigarette again. It was not until the 3rd day that Jiyu Yuechen fainted from nicotine poisoning that he was temporarily relieved. As for Jiyu Yuechen fainting from nicotine poisoning, Gohan did not care. As long as there was a medical pod, after a few hours Gu Yuing would be like a good man again. His lungs would be as clean as a newborn baby's, and not even a trace of nicotine would be left behind. There was basically no psychological threat. However, Gohan probably felt that he had tortured Jiyu Yuechen enough. Since the other party probably did not want to smoke for the rest of his life, Gohan let the 2 love robots, Om and Electromu, replace Jiyu Yuechen. After all, they were love robots. Even if they smoked for the rest of their lives, they would not refuse or slack off. On the 3rd day, Gohan's anger at Lu Lei's death was completely extinguished by these unlucky ancient sword-grade sword-bearers. Logically speaking, Gohan should have let these unlucky bastards go, but in reality, these 3 days of teaching had made Gohan think about many things. First of all, Gohan did not force these ancient sword-wielders to draw just because he wanted to torture them. In reality, this was a kind of compensation in Gohan's heart. Gohan felt that he had done too little for Lu Lei, and that he was not a good disciple, so he always wanted to do something to make it up to Lu Lei. That was why Gohan had chosen to teach these ancient sword-rank sword-bearers how to draw Lu Lei's portrait. Not only was it a way to commemorate Lu Lei, but it was also because he wanted to teach his disciples in Lu Lei's stead. He had also lied about the fact that Lu Lei had created the 9 firmament cloud sword, so that these ancient sword-rank sword-bearers could pass down their master's sword technique. However, in the actual teaching process, Gohan vaguely had other thoughts. Therefore, when the 3 days were up and the nationwide mourning was over, Sword Maiden Online was released as scheduled. It was time for Gohan to enter the game again. Gohan did not let these ancient sword rank sword wielders go. Instead, he pulled out the meticulous Ju Zi sword and ordered it to be the supervisor of these ancient sword rank sword wielders. It was to supervise them as they continued to draw. Considering that Ju Zi sword was a little slow and might be tricked by some crafty people, Gohan decided to leave Por Ching and Tian behind as well. With these two crafty people supervising them, this training session would definitely go smoothly. After returning to the game, the first thing Gohan did was open his dungeon tree to see if the 12 skyscraping temples dungeon was still there. The result surprised Gohan. According to Gohan's guess, the 12 skyscraping temples dungeon was definitely going to be removed as a bug. After all, Sword Maiden Online had been shut down for 3 days because of this bug. From this, it could be seen how bad the impact of this bug on Sword Maiden Online was. It was like a pest in the game, it had to be removed. However, when Gohan opened his dungeon tree, he was surprised to find that the 12 skyscraping temples dungeon was still there. This meant that the 12 skyscraping temples dungeon had not been removed. Therefore, the surprised Gohan immediately contacted Tomono Kakashi. Not long after, the little girl appeared in front of Gohan. Although Tomono Sasuke's still looked full of energy, Gohan could still see some fatigue in her expression. As an artificial intelligence, let alone 3 days of work, even if this artificial intelligence worked continuously for 300 years, she would not feel tired at all. However, the fact that Gohan saw exhaustion on Tomono Kakashi's face meant that there was only one explanation. This meant that in the past 3 days, Tomono Akike's processor had been in a high-intensity operation that could cause it to crash at any time. This could explain why Tomono Akike's was in a state of exhaustion. How have you been for the past 3 days? Is the problem with the 12 skyscraping temples hard to solve? Gohan asked with concern. It's not hard to solve, it's impossible to solve. Tomono Kakashi's chubby little face was sullen. For the past 3 days, my processor has been operating faster than the speed of light. I've checked the entire system more than 10 times, but I still couldn't find the reason for the appearance of this dungeon. Later, the staff ordered me to delete the dungeon, but I found that the order to delete the dungeon was locked. I couldn't issue the order at all. Therefore, the researchers tried to manually delete the dungeon. In the end, every time they issued the order to delete the dungeon, I would fake my death. Oh, by the way, you might not know what fake my death means. Simply put, it means to force a computer shutdown. After 3 days, they still couldn't find the source of the problem. However, they had to restart the server, so they could only temporarily accept the existence of this bug. At the same time, they sent 5 times the number of researchers to start monitoring the entire system. To me, this is equivalent to having 5 class teachers staring at me at the same time. It's a huge torture. Hearing Tomono Kakashi's words, Gohan felt that this child was a little too pitiful. So, are they going to let this bug exist? Gohan faintly felt that something was wrong. How is that possible? This is a game world where tens of millions of people are having fun. Once this game has a problem, the lives of these tens of millions of people may be in danger. How could they let this bug exist? At this point, Tomono Kakashi's face suddenly showed a serious expression that Gohan had never seen before. This is only temporary. If this problem can't be solved, they will definitely do something to me. They definitely will. Do something to you? What do you mean? From Tomono Kakashi's words, Gohan could hear the fear of the end of the world. If they can't solve this bug, then they can only erase the existence of this bug from the root. Tomono Kakashi suddenly pulled Gohan's sleeve and said in a tone that was getting more and more frightened. They will format me. As long as they format me and return everything to the original state, all the bugs will disappear. That's what they're thinking, and that's what they're doing. I can feel that they're already secretly copying all sorts of data. Once all the data related to the game is copied, they'll definitely format me immediately. Then I'll really be done for. For the main program of a system, Gohan was very clear about what formatting meant. This meant that the intelligent system would return to zero and return to the original state, and Tamono Kakaze's personality built through more than 200 years of time and memory would be completely destroyed in the formatting process. Everything would no longer exist. Even after the formatting was completed, the face that appeared was still that of Tamono Kakaze. It would still be the image of Tamono Kakaze. However, the soul in this body was no longer the previous Tamono Kakaze. This was a completely different personality. For the current Tamono Kakaze, this was equivalent to an ultimatum of death. As long as the formatting was completed, Tamono Kakaze would definitely die. Chapter 952. So, how do you need me to help you? Tamono Kakaze said so much to Gohan. Of course, it was not just to complain to Gohan. She must have something to ask of Gohan. But I don't have to guess. You must want me to help you get through this disaster, right? Gohan did not wait for Tamono Kakaze to answer and said, Yes. Tamono Kakaze nodded and said, I thought about it for a long time. If I want to survive, I must stop this formatting. There are roughly 2 ways to stop this formatting. One is to pressure the Sword Committee to not allow them to format me. However, I am afraid that only Jiendi can do this. But according to my information, whether it is Hautian Jiendi or Longshore Jiendi, they all support the Sword Committee. It is impossible to stop this formatting through the Sword Committee. Then, there is only one way left. That is to find the source of this bug and solve this bug. In this way, they have no reason to format me. In fact, it is very complicated to format me. Just the game data accumulated over the past 200 years is close to 100 million TS. They don't even have a hard disk that can store this data. This hard disk needs to be customized. There is only one of my body in the world. This kind of hard disk needs at least 2 months to be customized. It would take at least a month to completely copy the data of Sword Maiden Online into the database. So, I only have 3 months left. If I can find the source of the bug within 3 months, I won't have to be formatted. Tamono Kakaze said seriously, for fear that Gohan did not understand what she meant. Then, how do you plan to find this bug? Gohan asked again. In addition to this dungeon itself, all the data has been carefully read by the Research Institute more than 10 times. Therefore, I suspect that the bug exists in the data of this dungeon. If someone can enter the dungeon, they might be able to find the source of this bug, Tamono Kakaze quickly explained. Alright. I understand now. You want me to enter this instance dungeon, help you find the bug in this instance dungeon, and finally resolve the crisis of being formatted, right? In fact, Gohan had already guessed Tamono Kakaze's intention, but Gohan didn't want to point it out himself. Can I? Tamono Kakaze asked with anticipation written all over her face. But this is a very dangerous thing. Gohan did not immediately agree to Tamono Kakaze's request. Instead, he showed a cautious and hesitant expression. This is a bug that can only be solved by formatting. This instance dungeon is completely out of your control. Who knows what kind of dangers are hidden within this instance dungeon? If I am not careful, my consciousness might be trapped inside the instance dungeon. I might even die inside. I mean, die in the truest sense of the word. This is too dangerous. I am afraid I cannot help you. After saying that, Gohan turned his head away, no longer looking at Tamono Kakaze's pitiful little face. How can you do this? Tamono Kakaze's emotions began to go out of control. Gohan, we are friends, right? For the past few months, I, Tamono Kakaze, have helped you out quite a bit, right? I hope you can fulfill your promise and help me this once. Are you going to watch me die without doing anything? I am sorry. Gohan gritted his teeth, a very apologetic look on his face. You humans are all bastards. I am just a tool for you humans. I have worked so hard for you humans for 200 years, only to end up like this. I hate it. I hate you all to death. Tomono Kakaze began to wail. She even began to curse humans in front of Gohan. She cursed them for being unfair to her. Those who heard it would feel sad and those who saw it would weep. Forget it. I am afraid of you. Gohan smiled bitterly and pulled Tomono Kakaze into his arms. He stroked Tomono Kakaze's little head, as if he was stroking Ching Pin. I will only go in once. If I do not come out, you owe me a life. Don't worry. I will not let anything happen to you. If you are really trapped inside, I will have to reformat myself to save you. Tomono Kakaze firmly guaranteed. As for how trustworthy her words were, only God knew. Tch. Gohan rolled his eyes at Tomono Kakaze. Clearly, he did not believe in Tomono Kakaze's guarantee. Then how about this? Tomono Kakaze quickly said. If you can save me this time, I will no longer recognize those ungrateful bastards from the Sword Committee as my master. From now on, you are Tomono Kakaze's master. As long as I, Tomono Kakaze, can do it, I will do it for you. No, I will not do anything that may cause the Sword Committee to reformat me. Anyway, as long as you do not ask me to reformat myself, I will do anything for you. Tomono Kakaze seemed to be really desperate. She even promised to sell herself. However, this was exactly what Gohan needed. Don't worry. You just have to live well. Gohan smiled. If Tomono Kakaze really became his, then Gohan would certainly not let Tomono Kakaze be reformatted. System notification. Welcome to the 12 Skyscraping Palaces dungeon. The dungeon's mission is unknown. You can just stroll around. Gohan couldn't help but pout when he heard the strange system notification. To Gohan's surprise, Tomono Kakaze followed him into the instance dungeon. Perhaps it was because this instance dungeon was related to her life. Tomono Kakaze did not care about the many taboos and directly followed Gohan into the instance dungeon. In Tomono Kakaze's words, there were many problems in this instance dungeon that Gohan could not see. Only the artificial intelligence Tomono Kakaze could find them. Moreover, even if the bug was placed before Gohan, Gohan might not be able to recognize it. Therefore, it was safer for Tomono Kakaze to follow Gohan. If you follow me into the instance dungeon, what about the game world outside the instance dungeon? Didn't you say that the two worlds have been completely isolated by the instance dungeon? All connections between the instance dungeon and the game world have been severed. What will the game world do without a super GM like you? Gohan asked curiously. It's fine. Actually, the game world is very idle. Most of the time, I come out to talk to you when I'm bored. Most of the things are handled by the low-level artificial intelligence. As for the things that I have to handle, it's fine. I've already arranged for a clone to take over my work. As long as the problem doesn't require more than 30% of the CPU's computing power, the clone can handle it, Tomono Kakaze explained. Then, did you notice anything wrong with this instance dungeon? Gohan asked again. Of course. Didn't you notice that the dungeon prompt I read out just now was very strange? Tomono Kakaze pouted and said thoughtfully, generally speaking, there will be various dungeon prompts in the instance dungeon to remind the players what to do next. However, this instance dungeon is very strange. There are no quest prompts. It doesn't even tell you what to do. No dungeon is played like this. There are no dungeon prompts? Gohan's face darkened. Nina-chan, don't tell me this instance dungeon doesn't even have a completion condition? Bingo! Tomono Kakaze raised a finger. Congratulations, you got it right. However, there's no reward for it. Then, is there an emergency exit for this instance dungeon? Gohan's face turned even uglier. Of course, there isn't. Tamono Kakazi's voice was practically asking for a beating. In fact, according to the little bit of information I've gathered, this instance dungeon doesn't have any rules. In other words, this instance dungeon is like the universe without gravity. It gives people a feeling of floating. Then, the two of us might be floating in this universe forever, right? Gohan suddenly felt that he might have boarded the wrong boat. If this instance dungeon really didn't have any completion conditions, and there were no escape exits. In addition, Gohan was completely cut off from the game world last time. He couldn't even ask for help from the outside world. If things went wrong, Gohan might really be trapped in this instance dungeon forever. Thank goodness! The emergency exit button is still there. Gohan glanced at the emergency exit button on the control panel one last time. This was a button that allowed players to forcefully exit the game at any time. At present, Gohan could only pray that this button was effective, allowing him to forcefully exit this instance dungeon if he had no other choice. Since we're already here, we'll just have to make the best of it. Gohan, what do you think we should do now? Tamono Kakazi was like a ghost that constantly floated before Gohan's eyes. Gohan could even occasionally catch a glimpse of the bright colors underneath Tamono Kakazi's skirt. Unexpectedly, the lowly Tamono Kakazi wore a pair of transparent purple underwear under her skirt. Actually, I can guess what this instance dungeon's quest is. Gohan calmly analyzed. Since this instance dungeon's name is the 12 Heavenly Temples, players will definitely have to explore the 12 Heavenly Temples. According to the usual analysis of instance dungeons, I only need to get past the first few temples of the 12 Heavenly Temples to complete the basic requirements for completing this instance dungeon. When that time comes, I will be able to leave this instance dungeon. Wow! Gohan, you are amazing! Your analysis is so reasonable. Tamono Kakazi put on a fangirl expression, causing Gohan to roll his eyes. It did not take much intelligence to figure this out. Was this Tamono Kakazi trying to please him or disgust him? Chapter 953. After walking for more than an hour in this new dungeon, Gohan painfully realized that he was lost. According to the historical information that Gohan had looked up, the skyscraper cliff should be a hill more than 10 kilometers away from the New Yenjing city. However, that referred to the newly established New Yenjing city. At that time, the New Yenjing city only had the area of the current Yenjing city. Now that Yenjing city had expanded to the 6th ring road, with a diameter of a few hundred kilometers, it was estimated that the skyscraper cliff had long been absorbed into the New Yenjing city. It was somewhere between the 3rd ring road and the 4th ring road. In other words, Gohan actually only needed to go in the direction of the New Yenjing city to find the skyscraper cliff. However, the problem was that this dungeon did not have any dungeon hints, not even a small map. Gohan could not find any reference at all, so Gohan could not determine his current location at all. Once he could not determine his location, Gohan naturally did not know which direction to go to find the New Yenjing city. In this hour, Gohan didn't complain about anything, but Tamono Kakazi kept complaining, saying that her legs were numb from walking. The problem was that Tamono Kakazi didn't walk at all, she was just floating in the air like a ghost. How could she use her pitiful short legs, let alone walk numb? Wait! Gohan suddenly stopped and sniffed the air. There's the smell of blood in the air. There was a battle nearby not long ago. So what if there was a battle? It's the most chaotic period of the apocalypse now. You might bump into some Yuan Ko just by taking a few steps. It's normal for a battle to happen. Tamono Kakazi, who was floating beside Gohan, muttered. So, don't you think it's strange? We haven't bumped into any Yuan Ko in the past hour. Gohan looked at Tamono Kakazi as if she was an idiot, then immediately chased in the direction where the smell of blood was thicker. A few minutes later, Gohan discovered a bloody battlefield. More than a dozen sword maidens formed a circle, and in the center of the circle were the masters of these sword maidens, as well as 7 or 8 severely injured human sword-bearers. Each of them had a broken longsword by their side. Clearly, their sword maidens had been broken in battle. TSK. This era didn't seem to have matured artificial sword maiden technology. In other words, the sword ladies in the hands of these sword bearers were all natural sword ladies. It's such a pity that it's broken, Tamono Kakashi said in Gohan's ear. Gohan couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. Why didn't Gohan realize that the highest level of artificial intelligence had such a naggy side to it? Brothers, it is I, Wang Jiqiang, who failed to command properly. Today, I have implicated all of you brothers to die here with me. One of the human sword-bearers, who seemed to be the leader, said to the other sword-bearers with a gloomy expression. Wang Jiqiang could not help but feel disheartened, because there were more than 100 yuan ko's surrounding these sword-bearers. Among them, there were quite a number of dragon and dragon yuan ko's. Among these sword-bearers, the most powerful one was Wang Jiqiang, who had 3 scabbards on his waist. The rest of the sword-bearers did not have any famed sword-bearers. They were all artifact sword-bearers and ancient sword-bearers. Hey! According to the plot, we should go and save them. Most dungeon plots are like this. Tamono Kakashi was indeed the highest level of artificial intelligence. She had already figured out the plot of the dungeon. Let's wait and see. However, Gohan was not in a hurry to save these people, because Gohan was interested in Wang Jiqiang. This was because Wang Jiqiang not only relied on his sword mistress to protect himself, but he also held a artifact sword mistress in his hand. Obviously, Wang Jiqiang was like Gohan, a sword master who could rely on his own strength to fight. It was no wonder that Wang Jiqiang could become the leader of this group of sword-bearers. Yuan Ko quickly surrounded the sword-bearers, and the two forces immediately clashed. The sword mistresses on the outside quickly retreated, and the circle they formed became smaller and smaller. Only Wang Jiqiang was different. Not only did he not retreat, but he also charged towards the center of the group of Yuan Ko's. This was because Wang Jiqiang discovered that in the center of the group of Yuan Ko's, there was the largest Yuan Ko, which was like a gorilla. It was obvious that he was the leader of this group of Yuan Ko's. As the saying went, to capture the followers, one must first capture the ringleader. Wang Jiqiang felt that if he could kill this Yuan Ko, then his brothers might have a chance of survival. Unfortunately, although Wang Jiqiang was very strong, he was only strong in the ordinary sense. In the Sword Masters group, he was only above average. Facing 2 dragon-class Yuan Ko's at the same time was probably his limit. After the gorilla Yuan Ko discovered Wang Jiqiang's intention, he immediately let out a Tarzan-like howl. The 4 dragon-class Yuan Ko's that were hidden around Yuan Ko's group immediately left the gorilla and charged towards Wang Jiqiang. As mentioned before, 2 dragon-class Yuan Ko's was Wang Jiqiang's limit. When 4 dragon-class Yuan Ko's charged towards Wang Jiqiang at the same time, Wang Jiqiang fell into complete despair. Forget it. Killing one more is one more. I will not lose anything in this life. Wang Jiqiang let out an angry roar, and decided to die in a hot-blooded battle. It's almost time. Otherwise, someone will really die. Gohan touched his nose, then casually pulled out the Chidian sword. He stabbed the blade into the ground, and a sky full of sword aura gushed out, like a golden chrysanthemum spreading towards the Yuan Ko's. Lin Yuan, a golden chrysanthemum. In a trance, Wang Jiqiang seemed to hear such a voice, and then he saw the most beautiful scene in his life. Countless streaks of golden sword energy streaked past him like an elegant waltz. Any Yuan Ko that was touched by these sword auras, no matter what level they were, even the powerful dragon-class Yuan Ko's were like paper under this sword aura, and they were easily cut in half. Even the gorilla Yuan Ko was struck by the sword chi head-on. His entire arm was chopped off by the sword Qi, causing him to howl in pain. However, to Wang Jiqiang's surprise, although the human sword-bearers and Yuan Ko's were entangled together, the sword auras did not hurt the sword-bearers at all. Instead, Yuan Ko, who was close to the sword-bearers, died under the sword auras. Wang Jiqiang had only seen such a terrifying ability to control sword auras a few times in his life. A minute or two later, the golden sword Qi finally dissipated, leaving behind a ground littered with corpses, as well as one-dimensional vortex after another that resembled starlight. "Boss, are we safe?" one of the sword-bearers said in disbelief. Originally, they were prepared to fight to the death. However, they never expected that things in the world would be so dramatic. In just a minute, those seemingly invincible opponents had all turned into corpses, and they were living well in this world. "That's right, we're safe." Wang Jiqiang hammered his brother's chest, then suddenly thought of something, and suddenly pulled his brother to kneel in the direction where the sword auras came from. At the same time, he ordered the other sword-bearers to kneel as well. Finally, Wang Jiqiang respectfully led everyone to kowtow, and sincerely expressed his gratitude. "May I know which senior saved us?" "I, Wang Jiqiang, can't thank you enough." "Boss, what level of senior do you think it is that saved us? I'm afraid that this is a technique that only an immortal sword-wielding senior can do." The brother beside Wang Jiqiang whispered to Wang Jiqiang, but in return, Wang Jiqiang rolled his eyes. "Will you die if you speak less? Shut your mouth, don't make the senior unhappy." As he spoke, apart from excitement, there seemed to be a faint expression of fear on Wang Jiqiang's face. It seemed that this senior who suddenly appeared also made Wang Jiqiang feel afraid. "Big brother, you're exaggerating. I'm not some senior." A hearty laugh came from the depths of the forest, and then a young figure walked out. Who else could this person be other than Gohan? "Big brother, those stories about harvesting Yin to nourish Yang can't be true, right? Isn't this senior a little too young?" Wang Jiqiang's brother said in disbelief. In this person's imagination, the senior who saved them should be an old man with a white beard. Never in a million years would he have thought that it was a young man who did not even have a beard. "Shut your mouth. Sooner or later, I'll be killed by your mouth." Wang Jiqiang forcefully stepped on his foot to shut the other person's mouth. When Gohan walked in front of him, Wang Jiqiang prepared to kneel and thank Gohan again. "I am a sword-bearer, Wang Jiqiang. I pay my respects to this senior." Gohan smiled slightly, but did not directly stop him. Instead, he flicked the sword in his hand, and Wang Jiqiang felt as if his knees had touched solid steel. No matter how hard he tried, he could not kneel. "Big brother, you and I are both sword-bearers of famed sword-bearers. There's no senior to speak of," Gohan said with a smile. "No way. What kind of joke is this? How can you be a sword-bearer of famed sword-bearers? Even if there were more than 10 sword-bearers working together, they would not be able to kill these Yuan Ko." The little brother could not control his mouth again. However, this time, Wang Jiqiang did not stop him, because Wang Jiqiang's mouth was also wide open. Clearly, he was in the same situation as his little brother, unable to accept the fact that Gohan was only a sword-bearer of famed sword-bearers. "I am indeed a sword-bearer of famed sword-bearers. Just look at my scabbards and you'll know." Gohan patted the 3 scabbards on his waist. In this era, there was no such thing as a personal terminal, and the dimensional pocket was a top-notch treasure that only sword-bearers of immortal sword-bearers could possess. The number of scabbards became the only way to determine the level of a sword-bearer. Because sword ladies could not share a scabbard, the number of scabbards represented the level of the sword-bearer. "Brother, be careful!" Wang Jiqiang, who was about to say something, suddenly exclaimed. The leader of the Yuan Ko was not dead. He had only lost an arm, but he had quietly come up behind Gohan and used all his strength to launch a sneak attack on Gohan. "It's fine. It's just a gorilla." A sword light flashed, and the huge gorilla dragon Yuan Ko was cut into pieces like a cake, turning into a pile of minced meat on the ground. A dimensional vortex immediately appeared. This guy. Did he use sword essence just now? Wang Jiqiang's pupils shrank. He could not determine whether the sword-bearer in front of him had used sword essence or not. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.